Broadcasting from the dark corners of the earth, it's Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio. Welcome back, everyone, if you are indeed returning from an absence or from our previous broadcasts. It's only been 2 broadcasts, but I'm trying to get a trend going, or at the very least, trying to keep up the habit. As always, I will meander for a bit, through theme and idea, until we get more people. I'll give people a time. Hey, there he is. Welcome, welcome. Now, I hate to admit it, but the real reason I'm doing this is because I'm out of weed, and I can't sleep at night without it. So, this is just going to keep going until I can afford my next batch. That's not true. I'm actually quite enjoying this, and the steady progress we're making through the book is quite enjoyable. I feel like I should banter here, or at the very least do something to fill the time until we get a bit of. I give people time to shuffle in. That's what I like to imagine. I like to imagine that I'm in a radio booth, and that just outside of the radio booth, there's a bunch of chairs set up. Although I feel like that looks like an execution chamber more than a radio broadcasting station. But perhaps that's my own morbid sensibilities. Let's see, what do I have? What do I have that we can fill the time with? Oh, here we are. Under the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old. Actually, I should probably just read The Hobbit on this stream. That would probably be good. And then I can just sing those songs from the book itself. Now, I think we all know that the superior version of The Hobbit is the 1972 Rankin and Bass film. Am I right, fellas? None of that crass commercialization of the unnecessarily long Hobbit movies from, oh god, how long ago did those come out now? I think I was still in high school when those were coming out, which admittedly makes me feel quite old. I'm still struggling to get the ratio of lemon to Earl Grey correct. The real dramatic, what do you call it, tension of this nightly broadcast. We're probably going to finish the Scarlet Gospels within the next 2 nights, probably. I intend to keep broadcasting throughout the week. The only day that we won't be broadcasting is probably Thursday, because that's D&D night, and that tends to go pretty late. And then we also like to watch a movie afterwards. We've been recently watching a series called Hanzo the Razor. No relation to Hanzo the Sniper from Overwatch. Hanzo the Razor is a series of... there was a specific word for it, but it's some kind of Japanese swordplay genre. And it also has a lot of exploitation elements for those of you who know the keywords. But they're very silly and fun, if somewhat dated in their sensibilities, as many exploitation films are. The guy who was in them was an interesting fellow. He started as a shamisen player, and then he moved on to acting, because he noted that actors were paid much better than shamisen players. Maybe one day I'll do some kind of Japanese novel that's been translated. I have Battle Royale here somewhere, or in the basement. We'll also probably do shorter stories, one-offs and things like that. Yeah, so let's give it a few more minutes. This is pretty cliche, but how is everyone tonight? Settling in for the evening? Getting ready to snuggle under the covers and get ready for the work week ahead? At the time of recording, I am unemployed, which is also the reason I can get away with having midnight broadcasts. But hey, if I do this enough, maybe I can make this my job. What other books do I have on my shelf? Well, there's several Clive Barker books on my shelf. Oh, we could do the Books of Blood. That would be fun. And that'd be the first time I read them, too. I have Time Among the Maya, a travel book. That's what I should do. I should take all the books that I haven't bothered to read yet and read them aloud here. And if they turn out to be boring, then it's perfect, because the whole point of this show is to help put you to sleep. I should also find some music to play. Some music that isn't just from a attribution-free YouTube library. Yes, I admit it. But who would match my vibe? The other possibility is that I create long-winded, how shall we say, explorations into various topics. But those require a little more work, and so those will probably be fewer and far between. We could do some Jeeves and Wooster. That's lots of fun. What else do we have? Oh, I could read from the Necronomicon. I'm sure that'll go perfectly fine. This is Simon's Necronomicon, for those of you who are more occult-leaning. A very famous book that was published in, I believe, the 70s, the 80s? Let's see. Dedication on the 100th anniversary of the nativity of the poet Aleister Crowley, which also tells you very much what this book's more about. Let's see, where are you? 1977 by Schlangcraft Inc. Cool name. Artwork by Chemset Rising. Hell yeah. Ad Meorium Cthulhi Gloriam. This is the testimony of all that I have seen, and all that I have learned. For this is the Book of the Dead, the Book of the Black Earth, that I have writ down at the peril of my life. But it's not really a book that's narrative. I could just read it, and I'm sure all the nonsensical chants and so on would help put people to sleep. Alright, well, it's 10 past. That's our traditional time to start. Oh, where are my glasses? Ay, mis lentes, ¿dónde están mis lentes? Unfortunately, I can't read books in Spanish. When I read in Spanish aloud, I sound like a third grader trying to read a book aloud, so we won't be doing that. But if we ever read any books that do have Spanish in them, I will be more than happy to read those. And I do have a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo on my shelf, so that will be probably on the list, and that will certainly last us a long-ass time. That is a thick book right there. But to recap, when we last left our heroes, good old private detective Harry D'Amour, blind black medium, Norma Payne, the squat, muscly, tattooed woman, Lana, tall, muscly, tattooed man, Kaz, and fey, diminutive man, Dale, they had just stepped into hell after passing through a door that the Hell Priest had opened and taken Norma Payne through, along with his assistant Felixson. Ten. From the first, hell surprised them, even Harry, who had caught a fleeting glimpse of its geography in Louisiana. They stepped out to the other side of the place of the passage into a far from unpleasant sight. A grove and a forest of antediluvian trees, their branches so weighed down with age that a small child could have picked the large, dark, purple-skinned fruit by simply reaching up. However, none such child had been on duty to harvest the fruits, and as a result, they littered the ground, the sickly stink of their corruption only one part of the stew of smells that had added its own particular horror to the oppressive stench that had stopped Harry in his tracks as he'd passed from Earth to Hell. "God damn," Lana said. "I thought the roaches in my apartment were big." She was looking down at the brown-black insects that appeared to have a close familial relation to the common cockroach. The main difference being that these were perhaps 6 times larger. They covered the ground at the base of the trees, devouring the food that had fallen there. The sound of their brittle bodies rubbing against one another, of their busy mouthparts devouring the fruit, filled the grove. "Anybody see Pinhead?" Harry said. "Is that his name?" Lana said. "Pinhead?" "It's a name I know he hates." "I can see why," Dale said, chuckling to himself. "It's not a very kind nickname, or even accurate for that matter." "Is this some kind of big noise in hell?" Kaz asked. "I don't know," Harry said. "I'm sure he thinks so. I just want to get Norma back, and the fuck out of here." "That's a good plan in theory, but the execution might prove a bit more difficult," said Kaz, gesturing towards the door through which they'd come, or rather, towards the place where it had once stood. The door was no longer there. "I'm sure we'll find a way out," Harry said. "It's easy enough. We should all—" "Back off, you little freak!" Lana shrieked, interrupting Harry's suggestion. It didn't take long to find out why. Dale was wiping blood from the knife Kaz had given him. Without warning, he had stuck the knife into the meat of Lana's palm. It was a nasty wound. When Kaz caught hold of Lana, whose face was already grey and clammy, he persuaded her to raise her hand and keep it raised so the blood could drain. The blood coursed down her arm, soaking her blouse in the process. "What the fuck?" Lana blurted. "I'll kill ya!" Kaz maintained his hold on her shoulder. Dale cracked a mischievous smile. Harry moved between them as a buffer and faced Dale, closing his hand around the hilt of his knife once more. "Mind explaining what the fuck that was, Dale?" Harry asked. "He's fucked! What else do we need to know?" Lana said. "Dreadfully sorry. I really am. It simply needed to be done. The dreams told me. I recognized the moment and got swept up in it." "I think your friend might be disturbed, Harold," said Kaz. "I'm gonna be sick," Lana said. "No, you're not," Kaz told her. "Don't look at your hand, look at me." He shrugged off his battered leather vest and pulled off his black t-shirt, tearing it up into bandage-width strips. "I'll have all of this out of sight in just a few seconds," he promised Lana. "You're gonna be fine." This fucking sucks. That's the hand I use for, you know." Kaz smiled, doing his best to get the wound bound tightly enough to stop the flow of blood. Harry, meanwhile, watched Dale closely, who was trying his best to apologize, but his supplication fell on deaf ears. None of Harry's alarms were sounding when he pointed them towards the diminutive man, but then again he was smack dab in the middle of that no longer fabled land where villains were supposedly dealt their karmic justice, and as a result, his tattoos were behaving erratically. Harry went with good old-fashioned intuition and separated Dale from the group. "You're on probation," Harry said. "Out in front. Any other tricks? I let Lana have her way with you." Can't I just now?" Lana said. "Just wait," Dale said. "You'll see. The dreams are never wrong. I found you, didn't I, Harry?" There was silence for several seconds, at least among the two-legged occupants of the grove. The roaches continued their seething, sibilant song among the decaying fruits. Finally, Harry spoke, ignoring Dale's question. "Let's prioritize here. At the risk of stating the obvious, this isn't going to be easy. We need to find Norma as fast as we can, avoid the powerful demon that wants me as his slave, and then get the fuck out of hell. I'm sure we'll encounter some heinous, unthinkable, soul-scarring shit along the way, but hopefully we all make it out of here alive." His friends fell silent. Lana gripped the tender flesh of her wounded hand close to her chest and snorted, "Good pep talk, Coach. I feel much better now." 11. Norma had been sitting in what she judged to be many hours in a darkness within a darkness. For the first time in her life, she saw nothing at all. Her blindness oppressed her. She longed to be cured of it, to be able to see something of the demon and his human underling, the one with the breath of a man who had an ulcerous stomach. Though the world as sighted people saw it was a closed book to her, she saw what they could not: the presence of phantom. Everywhere, their faces, ripe with a need and unspent passion, trailing their hunger like pollen from flowers that were past their hour but refused to wither and disappear. These sights had been, until now, more than adequate compensation for whatever spectacles she'd been denied. She had envied the sighted masses who walked the streets below her apartment nothing as long as she had her ghosts. But there were no ghosts here. She heard the dusty whispering that she knew was the sign of their presence, but no matter how loudly she called out to them, no matter how hard she willed them to appear, they would not come. "You are alone," the Cenobite said. She flinched. She had not heard him come in. It made her uneasy. Usually she knew in her bones when anything was nearby. But the demon was quiet. Too quiet. And he stank. God almighty, he stank. Her sensitivity to the nuances of smell was another gift of her sightlessness, and this creature stank to high heaven. This was a being who trafficked, of course, with demons. Their countless varieties of bitterness were all over him. So too was blood, as of the overpowering scent. Yes, so too was blood, as of the overpowering scent off a butcher's apron. Whiffs of it came oft in whatever instruments of hurt hung from his waist. But the strongest scent was also the oldest. It was the perfume of his transgressions. There were other smells, too, some of which she could name. Incense, books, sweat, and far, far more that she had no name for. He had spoken to her scarcely at all except to remind, as if she did not already know, that he was an expert in the provision of suffering, and that if she did anything to irritate him, she would instantly have first-hand knowledge of his expertise. Only when her nerve endings and her sanity had given up, and only then, he had said, would she be granted an undignified death. So she had not moved. She stayed in the darkness within the darkness, and done her best to reach out past the horrors to some comforting memory, the face of a happy revenant, one whom she directed to the place where his loved ones would be, or the fine, happy times she had with Harry and a bottle of brandy, reminiscing about some shared craziness. But for some reason, the memories gave her no pleasure now. There was a stone in her stomach, and it weighed her down, stopping her from flying off into the past. She was therefore glad, in point of fact, that the demon had finally condescended to come back to her, into her presence, even with his bitter sense, invading her senses. In that, she was at least saved from boredom. The detective and his band of misfits will surely have come for you, he said. I will keep you alive. Despite your friend's protestations, he has already begun his work as my witness. Then, without warning, he hit her in the stomach. The blow bent her double. There she stayed, gasping for air. Before she could catch her breath, he went at her face with a left, then a right, then another left, each blow a loud, stupefying sound in her head. There was a moment's hiatus, and then he came back at her, physically unbending her by seizing hold of her shoulders and lifting her up as he threw her against the wall. Again, the breath went from her, and her legs, which were going increasingly numb, threatened to fold up beneath her. No, he said as she began to slide. You stay standing. He put his right hand around her throat to hold her head up, and with his left proceeded to strike her again and again, delivering hammering blows to her liver, her heart, her kidney, to her breasts, her gut, her sex, and then her heart again, twice, 3 times, and down through the same already tender and aching places. It was pleasure he was feeling, she was certain. Even now, as she barely held on to consciousness, some part of her that could never relinquish the study of body language heard the little exhalations of contentment emerge from the demon when he stood back for a moment, and revelled in the tears and anguish on her bloodied and swollen face. She felt his stare like a subtle pressure upon her, and knowing that he was finding joy in her suffering, she pulled together every thread of strength in her soul, and she brought those tears up behind her face to deny the satisfaction. She knew it would piss him off, and that knowledge only strengthened her. She closed her mouth and coaxed the thread of strength into turning up the corners of her lips into a Gioconda smile. Her eyes she also closed, slowly lowering her lids to conceal from him her frailty. There would be no more tears now, nor shouts of pain. The threads had sewn the expression in place. It was a mask. Whatever she truly felt was hidden beneath it, unreachable. He released the clamp of his hand from her neck, and she slid down the wall, her legs folding up beneath her. He pressed his booted foot against her shoulder, and she toppled over. After that, he delivered one vicious kick to her body, cracking several ribs, and another to her throat, which really tested the strength of her mask. It held, however. Knowing what was coming next, she tried to bring her hand up to her face to protect it, but she wasn't fast enough. His boot got there first. One straight kick to the face, blood bursting from her nose. Another kick at her face now. Finally, she felt the darkness within a darkness wrapping her in its blanket of nullity, and she was grateful for its imminence. The demon raised his foot and brought the boot down hard on the side of her head. It was the last thing she felt. Oh, Christ, she thought. I can't be dead. I've left so much unfinished. Funny. She didn't feel dead. But then wasn't that the most common thing she heard from her visitors? And if she wasn't dead, why could she see for the first time? And why was she hovering 9 or 10 feet above the place where her body lay against the wall? The demon? What did Harry call him? Dickface? Pinprick? Pinhead! That was it. He was backing away from her, his breathing ragged. It had taken no little effort for the Cenobite to brutalize her the way he had, and stepping away, he changed his mind and approached her again, kicking her hands away from her face. He'd made a real mess of her, no doubt of that, but she was pleased to see that her enigmatic smile was still in place, defying him. There was a sliver of satisfaction in that, no question, however hard the rest of the news was to take. Aside from the obvious, she found it impossible to think of the demon as a pinhead. That was a schoolyard insult, or the name of a pitiful sideshow freak. It did not belong to the monster standing over her body now, his body shaking with excitement from the beating he had just delivered. The demon retreated a few more steps, still looking at what his brutality had achieved, and then reluctantly withdrew his gaze and turned his attention to the little weasel of a man who had just entered the room and was lingering by the door. She knew without need to hear his voice that this was the creature who'd first caught hold of her on the streets of New York, whispering all manner of obscene threats into her ear to keep her from resisting his hold on her. He was more pitiful to look at than she'd imagined. A wizened, grey thing throwing peasant rags over his naked body. And yet, on his face, even now after what he'd done to her by hauling her here, she saw the remains of what had surely been once a man possessed of luminous intelligence. He had laughed much once, and pondered deeply too, to judge from the lines left by old laughter on his cheeks and the frown marks on his brow. As she studied them, she felt herself plucked away from the room where her beaten body lay. Some invisible tether was pulling her through this building, which was a maze of once beautiful rooms, grand halls where plaster rotted and fell away from the walls, and the mirrors decayed, their goldly frames flaking and crusting over. Here and there, as she made her unintentional departure, she caught sight of the remains of places where others, prisoners of circumstance like herself, had been tortured. The remains of one such victim lay with his legs in the furnace, where a fierce fire had once burned, consuming his extremities somewhere above the knee. The victim had died long ago, his flesh long since petrified, leaving behind something that resembled a bronze diorama that paid tribute to a murder scene. She saw the victim's ghost, too, hanging in the air, forever tethered to his agonized remains. The sight of him gave her comfort. She didn't understand this seemingly abandoned place, but she would be able to learn from its ghosts. They knew a lot, the dead. How many times had she said that to Harry? How many times had she said to Harry they were the world's greatest untapped resource? It was all true. All they'd seen, all they'd suffered, all they'd triumphed over. Lost to a world in need of wisdom. And why? Because at a certain point in the evolution of the species, a profound superstition was sown into the human heart that the dead were to be considered sources of terror rather than enlightenment. Angelic work, she guessed. Some spiritual army instructed by one commander or another to keep the human population in a state of passive stupefaction while the war raged on behind the curtain of reality. The order had been carried out, and instead of being allowed to comfort humanity's collective soul, the dead became the source of countless tales of terror, while the phantoms that were their spirits made manifest found themselves shunned and abominated until, over the generations, mankind simply taught itself a willful blindness. Norma knew what a loss there was in this. Her own life had been immeasurably enriched by the dead. Much of the human rage and appetite for war and its atrocities might have been soothed away by the certain knowledge that the 60 years and 10 of our biblical span were not the full sum of things, but rather a thumbnail sketch for a glorious, limitless work. But this knowledge would not come to light in her lifetime. Norma had only ever shared her thoughts with one living person, Harry. But she had listened countless times to ghosts unburdening themselves of their anguish at being unseen, unable to comfort their loved ones by simply saying, "I'm here, I'm right beside you." Death, she had come to realize, was a two-sided mirror of grief. That of the blind living, who believed they'd lost their loved ones forever, the other of the sighted dead, who suffered beside their loved ones, but could not offer a syllable of comfort. Her reverie was broken as she passed through the roof of the building, and the light of hell washed over her. She had assumed that at some point her sight would desert her, but it did not. As the building fell away beneath her, she was granted a bird's-eye view of the wilderness through which the Cenobite and Felixson had brought her. She hadn't really expected the infernal regions to resemble anything that the great poets and painters and storytellers evoked throughout the millennia, but she was still astonished that they now had fallen so far short of what her spirit now saw. The sky contained neither sun nor stars, which was predictable enough, but what it did contain was a stone the size of a small planet. The stone reached high above the immense landscape and spread out below, and it threw off fissures like lightning bolt. through which brightness poured. The effect upon the vast panorama was uncanny. This was scarcely a promising environment, but still, it found a way to grow, even prosper. On the slopes of the hills beneath her, long white grass swayed in some infernal wind here and there, bushes grew, the branches barbed and knuckled, but bearing small, colorless flowers. Her mind began to run wild once again. Where was this journey taking her? Did it even have a destination? Or was she simply loosed from her body and fated to wander hell for eternity? Regardless of her will or intent, the invisible tether continued to pull her towards unknown purpose, and as it did, her spirit began to sink towards the ground. In a few seconds she was moving inches above the level of the white grass. Some distance ahead of her was a small forest. The canopy of upper branches was intricately knotted, except for perhaps 30 or 40 wild ones that had freed themselves and grew like sticks of black lightning. Large black birds were perched on several of the knotted branches, fighting with beaks and claws for the choicest spots. She was so distracted by the sight of their feuding that she didn't notice the people emerging from the darkness beneath the trees until she was almost upon them. Then she smelled blood, and everything went white. Just gonna move the mic again. I'm going to make my laptop not make quite so much noise. There we are. 12. Dale, forced to the front by Harry, had been leading the way now. But as they had barely stepped foot out of the forest, he turned and stared at his followers. "It's close," Dale said. "Keep walking, dickhead," Lana said. "Harry, your friend's being weird again," said Kaz. "We talked about this, Dale," said Harry. No, said Dale in full southern charm mode. "It's about to happen. You will all be very happy, I promise. And when it's over, dearest Lana, I do hope you'll think better of me." "You're fucking creepy, man," Lana said. "All I know is I'd feel a whole lot better if I'm... She stopped abruptly, changing her tone from irritation to bewilderment. "What?" she said. Her voice hushed as she lifted her injured hand to her face and examined the injury as though seeing it for the first time. Fresh blood was running from underneath the bandages. "I'll be damned," she said in the same soft voice. "Harry?" I'm right here, Lana," Harry said. "I think I'm dead," she said softly, followed immediately by commanding, "Get out! Who the fuck—" "I will not get out." "Don't fight it, Lana," Dale said. "It's your blood. It's how she found us." "Fight what?" Harry said, approaching Dale, his tone serious. "What did you do?" "Whoa," Kaz said, tightening his grip on one of his knives. "Is this like a demonic possession thing? I'll kill the little dude right now if I have to. Shit's bad enough as it is." "Everyone shut up. It's me, Norma," said Norma from somewhere inside of Lana. "Who said you could hijack me?" Lana protested. "Norma?" Harry said, turning to Lana, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "Yes, it's me. I don't know—" The words ceased as Lana shook her head again, determined to dislodge her unwelcome guest. "What the fuck is happening here?" "Lana, let Norma speak," Harry said. "Fuck off!" Lana snapped. "I've been possessed before. It's not a feeling I like." "She won't stay long, honey," Dale said. "I promise." "Just let her say what she needs to say," said Harry. "This is why we're here." "Okay," said Lana, nodding as she drew a deep breath. "Just let me catch my bearings. I never had a friendly ghost inside of me." "You've never had anything friendly inside of you," Kaz said. "I'll remember that next time you're drunk and you can't find a man." Kaz pursed his lips. "Oh, I'm sure there's always a willing man for you," Dale said, eyeing Kaz, a smile on his mischievous face. Kaz, caught off guard, looked at Dale, flushed. "Okay," Lana continued. "I'm ready. Let's get it over with so we can get out of this shithole and go back to the shithole I'm familiar with." She closed her eyes and let out a deep, deep breath, then, "My goodness." "Norma?" Harry said. "Is that really you?" "'Fraid so, Harry. Oh, Lord, I think I might be dead. That bastard just finished beating the living shit out of me." "Pinhead? Hands on?" "Hands, feet. Last time I saw him, he was stomping on my head. I'm gonna fucking kill him." "That's a lovely thought, Harry. Thank you. But it's not gonna be easy. He's not your ordinary sadomasochist from beyond the grave. Oh dear, I think it's time to go already. Lana? Let her stay." "It's not Lana. It would appear I'm not dead after all. My body's wondering where the hell my mind went." "Do you know where your body is?" "Yeah. Some big-ass building straight down this road. Looks like it was really fancy back in the day, but it's falling apart now. Listen to me, Harry. You all gotta get out of here. I don't want anyone dying on my account." "No one's dying, and we're not leaving without you." "Oh, for Christ's sake, Harry, listen to me. He's too strong. Whatever you think you've got up your sleeve, it's not going to be enough. I'm not going to leave you down here, Norma. Whatever happens, I'm going to—" Lana's eyes opened, and there was a brief flash of confusion on her face. Then it cleared, and Lana said, "Is that it?" Harry sighed. "That's it. Thank you, Lana. You were great." "No problem," she said, fluttering her eyes. "Just as long as she doesn't plan on becoming a permanent tenant." "She doesn't." "Is she dead? Because that's what freaks me out, having a dead person in here with me now." "She's alive," Harry said. "For now." "Oh, and Dale?" Lana said. Dale said. "Next time tell me what the fuck you need to do before you do it. You cut me again without approving me for a good... without approving? You cut me again without approving, even for a good reason like that one? I'll rip your cock off." Norma woke into a place of pain. Her head, her stomach, her back, her legs. She could feel every blow. "Get her to her feet, Felixson, and hurry. We have business in the city. It's time to put an end to that ridiculous regime. Better sooner, while they're still arguing amongst themselves. Get her up, and if she won't walk, then carry her." "But, Master, would it not be better to simply kill her?" Felixson said. The priest stopped his preparations and fixed his icy gaze on Felixson. Without uttering another word, Felixson bowed his head in apology repeatedly and approached the still bloodied and bruised Norma, then leaned in close to her face and uttered a quiet monologue. Norma got a whiff of Felixson's foul breath, which only added insult to her copious injuries. "I know you're listening to me, you black cunt. I don't know what he wants from you, but I don't intend to carry you all the way to the city. I'm going to make life a little easier for both of us. I can't heal you. I don't have that much power. But I can give you an epodiatic opiate. It will put the pain out of sight and mind for a while." Will it take my wits?" Norma murmured through the blood in her mouth. "What do you care? Just take what you're given and be grateful." He glanced away for a moment, just to confirm that he and his epodia weren't being witnessed. They weren't. The priest had once again begun his preparations, an incantation of some sort, when Felixson began muttering an incantation of his own under his breath. He was good, she had to give him that. She felt the opiate spreading through her body, its warmth removing all traces of pain. "That should do it," he said. "Oh my Jesus, yes. Just remember to moan and sob every now and then. You're supposed to be in pain, remember? Don't worry, I'll give him a good show." "Get up," Felixson then said loudly, grabbing Norma's arm and pulling her onto her feet. Norma let out a ragged series of cries and curses, but the fact was that the incantation was so strong that it had even taken away problems not caused by the demons. Arthritis, stiffness, the general pain created from the business of being, all gone. She felt better than she had in years. So what if the epoidia was only covering up the problem? She would happily live in this opiated state as long as she could. Next time she had a moment alone with him, she'd try to get him to teach her the trick he'd used, so she could get herself another fix when this one wore off. Then her thoughts turned to Harry and his gang of harrowers. Norma didn't like the idea of any of them, friends or not, traveling to this wretched place for her. But she knew Harry wouldn't take her advice, and she couldn't blame him. Were roles reversed, she'd ignore his request, just as he, no doubt, was ignoring hers. "What are you thinking, woman?" The question came from the Cenobite. "I'm just nursing my wounds." "Why nurse wounds you cannot feel?" I detest unconvincing lies. "I know what he did," the Cenobite, the priest said, pointing a gnarled finger at Felixson. "Never think, either of you, that I am not with you, even when you are not within eyesight." "No, Lord," Felixson said, his voice thinned with fear. "You disappoint me, Felixson. And you," the Cenobite turned to Norma, "you can stop that wretched hobbling. We've a long journey ahead. A plague fog now waits for us a quarter-mile from the city's limit. It will ensure that the damned are off the street and in their homes, if homes they have." Norma felt the demon's scrutiny abandon her, and, as he turned away, Felixson pushed past her. "God damn you," he whispered to her. "Get behind me and grab hold of my shoulder. If we get separated, I won't wait for you." "I'll be sure to hold on, then," Norma said. "God, I fucking hate the country," Lana said. She glanced around in disgust at the landscape. A hill lined with trees and shrubs, all black in color. The grass, where it grew at all, was white, and the dirt grew in blacker, and even the knotted branches of the trees. Harry suddenly stopped and stood alert. His ears pricked. The group fell silent. Everyone listened for the sound of whatever it was that Harry seemed to hear. "What are those screams?" Kaz said. "We are in hell," Lana remarked. Holding a hand up to silence his fellow infernal travelers, Harry climbed to the top of a nearby slope. When he got to the top, he balked at the sight on the horizon. "Jesus," he muttered. "That's big." "What you got there?" Lana said, climbing up to join him. "Whoa, is that fog?" Dale said, finishing Lana's question for her. "In hell?" "It's moving," Kaz said, his head barely cresting the slope before the sight stopped him in his tracks. "And fast." "Where's it going?" Lana asked. "Nowhere. Look," said Harry. The city, shrouded in fog as it was, looked vast, its buildings significantly more elegant and grandiose than Harry had expected. With its pale stone domes and its pillared plazas, this was clearly Hell's Rome. The city had been built on many hills. Many hills? What's wrong with me? The city had been built on many hills, nearly 2/3 of which rose gently, displaying tier upon tier of immaculate buildings. Hills had been carefully positioned to set their knotted, or trees had been carefully positioned to set their knotted darkness off from the polished beauty of the buildings around which they grew. These trees were dwarfed, however, by even the humblest of buildings on the slope. The city's architect had been a visionary, no doubt of that. There was nothing in Rome, nothing in any of the greatest cities in the world, that could hope to compare with the glories that had been brought into being here. Some had the simple authority of size, buildings 50 stories tall, the facades of which were not disfigured by so much as a single window. There were statues, too, their heads and shoulders easily clearing even the tallest of buildings. Whereas the statues of Rome's were finely and faithfully crafted likenesses of Christian icons and men who'd ruled the city, the statues here were puzzles. Some were only vaguely recognizable as humanoid. Others seemed to freeze in a blur of motion, a stone photograph of an unknown being caught in the throes of ecstasy, or agony, or both. And everywhere the laws of physics were casually defied. An immense building was held 100 feet in the air, or more, by two steep rows of steps at the front and the back. A trio of pyramids, their squares intricately inscribed, were built so as to seem to be caught by a seismic jolt that had thrown the two of them in the air and left the third supporting them by only the slenderest of means, corner to corner, edge to edge. And nestled amid it all was a greenish fog that sat, unmoving, in the expansive shantytown in a trench directly in front of the city. The fog cast its greenish hue into a band of buildings from the monolithic structures, close to the summit down to the high walls that marked the limits of the city proper as it sat. Willfully motionless over a portion of the mass of tents and crude shacks and animals that formed the chaotic fringes around the city limits. It was the place, this vast shantytown, that was the source of the screams. The bizarre fog had seemingly settled upon the place, and it was apparent that those who had failed to find their way out of its haze were in terrible agony. "Who's got the best eyes?" Harry said. "It's not me. I can see people moving down there, but they're a blur." "They're better staying that way," said Kaz. "What's happening?" "They're fucking insane or something," Lana said. "They're running around," Kaz said. Kaz shook his head. "Beating their heads against the wall. Oh God, there's a guy. Oh Jesus Christ." "Are they human?" "Some of them," Dale said. "Most look like demons to me." "Yeah," Lana said, "and human beings can't make noises like that." It was true. The cacophony, which continued to grow louder, was a sickening din, a befouling stew of noise that was beyond the capability of human lungs and throat. The near-death shrieks were mingled with the noises that sound like an engine or machine in the final phase of self-destruction, gears shredding and motors shrieking as they tore themselves apart. "This is more like it," Harry said. "Hell was starting to disappoint me." "Don't put that out there, man," Kaz said. "We don't need any more bad vibes than we already got." "Or, I don't know, maybe you do." He looked at Harry, who was squinting to try and get a clearer view of what was happening. "You can't wait to get down there, can you?" "I want this over with, Kaz." "You sure that's all?" "What else could there be?" Harry said, keeping his eyes strained on the spectacle. "Stop looking at the atrocities for 2 fucking seconds, Harold. This is me, Kaz. You know that I'm following you all the way down into this mess, no matter what, right? I'm here to get Norma, together, and I ain't leaving without her. But I need you to look me in the fucking eyes right now and tell me the truth, and don't do it for me, do it for you." Harry turned to face his friend and uttered a single defiant, "What?" "Are you enjoying this?" Kaz asked. Harry's face fell. After a moment, he opened his mouth to speak. That's when Lana shouted, "I can't take it!" Kaz and Harry turned to see Lana drop down onto the ground, her arms crossed over the top of her head, as though to forcibly hold in her sanity. Kaz went on her haunches beside her. "It's okay," Kaz said. "We'll be okay." "How can you say that? Look at them. Look what this place is doing to them. And they live here. We don't stand a chance." Harry sat down in the long white grass a yard from them, tuning out Kaz's placating condolences as he turned his attention once more to the chaos within the pit. Harry knew nothing of the poor creatures whose screams rose heavenward and more than likely fell on deaf ears. Perhaps they deserved the agonies that had been set upon them. Perhaps not. Either way, their supplications brought him into an unwelcome headspace, and they mingled with the rest of the assaults on his senses. The penetrating stench of sulfur mixed with burning flesh, the tattoos beating a wild refrain on his body in a way that brought him once more to that never-distant enough night. He could hear the demon's voice in his head, even now a world away. "Spit!" Harry heard the word tearing at the inside of his skull. How he wished he could have done something differently that night. If he had, maybe he'd be able to shake the feeling that he was now exactly where he belonged. Where he always belonged. In hell. "What you thinking about?" Dale's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. His words were an anchor wrapped in innocence. "I'm trying to figure out how we fit together," Harry said. "Why we're here." Dale laughed. "You don't have the first idea, do you?" "No. Do you?" "Ah. That's the big question, isn't it?" "You already know." "I sure do." "Care to let me in on the secret?" "Easy. Watchin' isn't the same thing as seein'." Harry laughed. "What the hell does that mean?" "I heard it in a dream." Apparently Dale assumed the conversation had reached its end there, because without uttering another word, he kissed Harry onto the top of his head and sauntered away. Kaz, meanwhile, had somehow coaxed Lana to her feet and was keeping the city at her back. I don't want to go down there, she sobbed, and none of you can make me. We wouldn't want to, Kaz replied. There was a raw chorus of birds overhead. Harry looked up to see the noise was coming from from the longer of the two species of winged creatures that were circling above the city. They had congregated with remarkable speed, attracted either by the promising din of agonies from the street or by the smell, which only now became apparent. The aroma was complicated. There was a twinge of blood in it, but also the fragrance of old incense, and another spell that was impossible to fix, and for that reason far more tantalizing than the others. He sat on the summit, his thoughts stirred up by the exchange of enigmas. It could scarcely have been called a conversation. He just had... I just lost my place. As he sat on the summit, his thoughts still stirred up. Summit, his thoughts still stirred up by the exchange of enigmas. It could have scarcely been called a conversation. He just had with a potentially crazy southerner. Harry took in the mingled glories and grotesqueries of hell. He wasn't any less exhausted than he'd been when he left his apartment in New York, and he wasn't any less in need of a 10-year vacation in Hawaii. Just him, a hut and a fishing pole. But if he was going to get there, then he was going to have to finish this first. Okay, he said. Let's do this. 13. Being in the fog had very little impression on Norma. The Hell Priest had done as she had asked him, and whatever protection he was using to seal himself off from the fog's effects, he had extended to her. She heard, all too clearly, however, the ghastly noises behind her made by those who'd been subjected to the fog's influence. Some were simple grunts made by creatures in pain. Others begged more articulately for help, but most pitiful of all were those who, upon seeing the Hell Priest's imposing figure emerge from the muck, requested with as much civility as they could muster that he please put them out of their misery. Suddenly, Felixson began to shout. Norma, who had clutched at his garment, felt the fabrics torn from her hands. "God in heaven, no!" he shrieked. "I can smell the fog! It's getting in my eyes, my mouth! Lord! Master! Help me!" Norma stopped dead in her tracks. "Hello? Hello? What happened? I thought Felixson was protected." "He was," the demon said, near to Norma's ear. She jumped at the sound of his voice. "But I've stopped." "What? Why?" "His story is at an end. His service to me is complete. I have, in you, all that I need." "You can't. I beg your mercy on his behalf." "You do not want to assume such a debt. He eased my pain because he did not wish to carry you. I know. I knew even then when he was doing it, but still, he did it." "Very well. All he need do is ask. Do you hear that, Felixson? Ask, and you shall receive." There was an answering sound from the magician, but it did not resemble any words known to Norma. Norma reeled in the direction of Felixson's gasps. "Speak," she said. "Felixson, listen to me. Your lord called his name. Answer him. That's all you have to do." She took a step in the man's direction, her arms extended. The tip of her right shoe came in contact with him first. "Can you hear me?" she begged, bending forward and searching for the magician. A gaseous grunt was all she received by the way of reply. "Felixson, speak the words." She heard pitiful sounds, indicating his final attempts, and then nothing. "Felixson?" she whispered in the darkness. "He can't hear you," the priest said. "Oh, Lord in heaven," Norma muttered. Her fingers, not yet believing what her mind was still only realizing, continued to search for Felixson's body. She had taken a knee, when her fingers made contact with something hot and sticky. Instantly she pulled her hand back, her mind's eye already painting an unwelcome picture of the flesh ravaged by the carnivorous fog. I don't understand," she said. "This man was loyal to you." What have I to gain by feeling anything? Isn't there anything you care about? All is death, woman. All is pain. Love breeds loss. Isolation breeds resentment. No matter which way we turn, we are beaten. Our only true inheritance is death, and our only legacy, dust. So saying, he turned and walked on, leaving the dead man behind. Norma said a short prayer for Felixson, and quickly followed after the Cenobite, for fear that if she faltered, he would decide she too was no longer worth protecting. Despite her age and sightlessness, it wasn't difficult for Norma to keep up. Whatever protection working had been thrown over her, it seemed to lend her body strength, and she followed in the demon's wake without undue effort. 14. It was called the Bastion of Tyath now, though it had gone by many names before that, each one chosen by the newest ruling despot. But however the interior of the bastion changed to suit the metaphysical or potential ambition of its occupants, the exterior remained unaltered. It was an uncompromising tower of stone, the blocks of which had been so precisely measured and chiseled that it was virtually impossible, unless you had your face to the bastion wall, to discover where one stone ended and another began. Many legends had accrued around it, chiefly regarding its creation. The most popular, and probably the likeliest, this, that it had been the first building raised in the vicinity. Its commissioner, architect, and sole mason, an demon called Hotheak, who had built it to protect his human wife, a woman called Jacqueline, who was pregnant with a quintet of hybrids, the first fruit of the mating between the sublime angelic, fallen or not, and the ridiculous human. All had survived, father, mother, and children, and from their 5 dynasties had descended increasingly contaminated bloodline and swelling lists of vendettas. Of the 8 members of the present regime, only 3 were in the bastion tonight. Their enthusiastic general, Augustine Pentathea, an unrepentant lover of war and its rapturous cruelties, sat in the high-backed chair where the regime's notably absent authority, Katha Nia Kapo, was usually seated. The others in the room, Ezekiel Suth and Josephine Leith, were not able to conceal their agitation. If Nia Kapo was here, Suth began, we would have this situation under control by now. It is under control, General Pentathea replied. He wore his hair long, as did all members of the regime, though Pentathea's hair was grey, and his purple-black brow ritually scarred with the 3 downward cuts, each the thickness of a finger. They had been coaxed with repeated cuttings to stand proud on his forehead. The marks gave him an expression of perpetual fury, though his voice was measured and calm. How do you figure? Suth said. I'd like to hear your theory as well, Lithe offered. She was standing against the far wall of the chamber, her waist-long white hair unkempt, her eyes closed as her detached gaze searched the fog outside, below the bastion, looking for the felon. He murdered all but a few of his order. We should have him arrested and executed. A trial would be better, Suth opinioned. He was, by several centuries, the oldest in the room, though he did much to conceal that fact. His hair dyed in a natural, intense black, his brows plucked, his skin white where it wasn't roughed. Something showy to distract the populace. Distract them from what? Said Pentathea. God damn it. Distract them from what? Said Pentathea. From the fact that we're losing control, Lethea said. Isn't it time we're honest? If not now, when? Lethea is right, General, Suth said. If we made a real example of the Cenobite, a long public trial followed by some form of crucifixion, we'd have back the love of our citizens and... Our enemy is at the gates, Lethea said, interrupting Suth's soliloquy. And he has a follower. Another Cenobite? Pentathea asked. I thought you said they were all dead. I said most, but it's not a Cenobite. It's a human woman. Then hell's most wanted villain is at our doorstep. Ezekiel, do you have anything prepared for this fiend? Penteatha wanted to know. As it happens, I do, General. I have devised a metal blanket, which has lining that will be filled with ice. We'll burn him at the stake. Eventually, of course, the ice will melt, and the fire will have its way. But I've repeated the experiment 11 times now, using men, women, and even infants, just to be certain my calculations were consistent. And Ezekiel Suth allowed himself a barely perceptible smile. He'll be fully conscious while the skin is burned off of him and his muscles fry in their own juices. Indeed, we'll judiciously arrange the fuel for the fire so that he isn't smothered by the smoke, which is too easy a death. Instead, he'll be cremated systematically. But I discovered that this method draws the victim up into a pugilistic pose, so I'll bind him with chains to prevent the posture. It'll oblige his bones to break while they cook inside his flesh. You've been thinking about this quite a lot, Penteatha said with a hint of distaste. One has to dream, General, Suth replied. Only a few minutes ago you didn't even know we had the bastard at the gates. No, but it was only a matter of time before somebody challenged us, wasn't it? Have faith. The Cenobite won't carry the day. He is one, and we are fewer than we should be, Lethe said. Hasn't anybody wondered why our glorious leader isn't here today? Absent without explanation on the very day that a killing fog comes out of the wastes, and that thing out there with his face of nails comes to pay a visit? What are you accusing him of? The general inquired. Who, Near Capo or the Cenobite? Bugger the Cenobite. I'm speaking of our leader, Catha Near Capo. I'm accusing him of being dead, most likely, General. And Kalat, and probably Hithamonio, too. All of them missing without explanation on this, of all days? Of course they're dead. The creature outside made it his business to murder as many in power as he could. And then what? Penteatha said. Aren't you the general here? Lethe asked. All you're doing is sitting atop the leader's throne and asking inane questions. This should be your field of expertise. It is, Penteatha said, rising from his post. I have led whole armies against the divine horde and seen them beaten back. I once had a place at Lucifer's table. I was Hell's general when it was still a mud pit, and I know exactly what's going to happen next. That demon is coming to kill us. When he's torn the meat from our bones, he will continue his mad quest, wherever it may lead him. In short, we had better depart. No, not just from this chamber, but from hell itself, if we value our lives at all. 15. As the members of the council discussed their future, the Cenobite who had been the subject of their conversation caused the three triple bolted iron gates that sealed off the bastion from the city street to be thrown open, their locks shattering like ice. At the same time, the group of weary travelers led by Harry D'Amour entered the city by the easternmost entrance, Janker's Gate. There were watchtowers to the left and right of the compound, but the towers deserted, and the right-hand gate open. Janker's Gate offered them the least impressive view of the city they had thus far. It lay close to the river, the same one they had crossed on a solid iron bridge, and therefore was occupied chiefly by those whose business was with the river. Demons who labored to keep alive the damned souls who'd been buried up to their chins in the adjacent mud flats, powerless to protect themselves from the birds that stalked the grounds, looking for worms and leeches and finding easier nourishment among the screaming bulbs, eating away their faces peck by peck, eyes, tongue, noses, and nerves, until the short-beaked birds could get no further and left the remaining rations to the infernal varieties of heron and ibis, who were better equipped at piercing the empty sockets to reach the fatty and plentiful brain tissue. But none of those creatures, damned or damning, were now found on the streets that led from the gate. There was plenty of blood, however, to mark their recent presences, the cobbles shiny, and the air filled with fat doxy flies that wove around them as though intoxicated. They weren't the only life-form feasting here. On the walls, where there were numerous bursts of blood, creatures that possessed the shape and gait of lobsters had emerged from between the brick and had gathered around these stains, their busy little mouth parts greedily scooping up the bits of food. "Is this what the fog did to people?" Kaz said. "I just want to know where they went," Dale said. "Was this not in the dream?" "No," said Dale, his voice falling below a whisper, "and I don't like it one bit." Lana was doing her best to keep the blood-drunk flies from landing on her, but they seemed immune to her flailing and happily settled in her hair and on her face. Harry wandered ahead of everyone, staring on at the street towards the larger and more architecturally ambitious of buildings that were visible beyond the modest two-story dwellings of the neighborhood through which they traveled. "The more," Dale whispered. "What?" "I think we should stick together," he said. The observation had barely left his mouth when a figure appeared from the alleyway behind him. It caught hold of Lana, who was perfectly able to deal with her attacker. A blow to the throat, a kick to his lower belly, and, as he bent double, an uppercut to his chin, and the attacker was down, sprawled on the cobbles. "What the fuck was that?" Harry said, approaching the unconscious demon. "I don't want to alarm you, Harold, but that is a demon." "But what's wrong with him?" Harry said. For the first time, Harry got a close look at what the fog had wrought. The creature was a demon, Harry saw. Well-fed and well-muscled, dressed only in baggy trousers, held up by the ornately decorated belts that younger demons seemed to favor, his prehensile tail emerging from a small slit in the back. Around his neck were several lengths of leather cord, each one bore some keepsake. In all of these regards, he resembled most of the demons belonging to minor orders whom Harry had encountered in the past. But Harry saw that the fog had worked a change in this demon, and it was not pretty. At the corner of his mouth and eyes, in the folds of his arms, or between his fingers, wherever, in short, the fog had touched him, it had apparently planted a seed, germinated not by producing the same infernal vegetation, but by taking its cue from the spot from which it had been sown and growing. A new life form that was ordained by its place of origin. Thus, the seed lodged between the demon's fingers had brought forth a crop of new fingers, all of which possessed their own beckoning life, and the seed beside the demon's mouth had created new mouths, all of which gaped, many-toothed, within his cheek and his neck. All these anomalies were humbled, however, by the work a seed lodged into his left eye had done, multiplying the number of eyeballs, so that from his brow to his cheek were a bunch of wet, lidless eyes, their yellowish corneas dissected up, down, and sideways. The demon reached out suddenly and caught hold of Kaz's ankle, its many jointed fingers easily locking around it. Despite the demon's agony, or perhaps because of it, the grip was vice-like. In his efforts to free himself, Kaz lost his balance and fell back and landed hard on the bloody cobblestones. Before anyone had time to react, the maddened demon crawled atop Kaz's body, his motion disturbing the flies that had come to rest on his anatomy and creating a ragged, shifting cloud around both of them. The demon was a big-bellied creature, and his weight was easily sufficient to keep Kaz pinned to the ground. "Jesus! Fuck! Someone help me!" Kaz yelled. "Where's the damn machete?" Harry said. "I've got it over here," said Lana. "Give it to me." Lana tossed the machete to Harry. No sooner had he caught it than the demon, perhaps dimly sensing that he was about to be opposed, reached out for Harry with one of his many-toed feet and caught hold of his throat, new gnarled toes sprouting as he tightened his grip and cut off Harry's oxygen. As the demon dug his nails deep into the flesh around Harry's windpipe, Harry took a swipe at the demon and buried the blade in the creature's thigh. Shock and pain made the thing loosen his throat hold on Harry, and Harry pulled away. The seeds continued to offer proof of their fecundity. The demon before him was transforming. The bunches of eyes were swelling, the mouths spreading down the creature's neck and out of his chest. They were all, by some elaborate reconfiguring the demon's internal anatomy, possessed of health enough to loose a chorus of screams and pleas. Harry intended to grant the only mercy he had on hand. "Kaz, now!" he said. As though they had done this 1,000 times before, Kaz instantly pushed the demon away from his body. At the same time, Harry swung the machete through a 180-degree arc. The blow sliced through a third of the demon's neck before it sunk into the creature's vertebrae. Harry worked the blade free, hot blood gushing from the massive wound into Kaz's open mouth. "Oh, fuck," Kaz said through liquid coughs. Harry swung at the demon's head a second time, hoping for mercy's sake to deliver the coup de grace, but there was too much crazed life in the creature, and he moved away as Harry swung the blade. This time, the machete cut through a burgeoning bunch of black and yellow eyes and sank deep into the demon's skull. 30 eyeballs, or more, dropped from the cluster and rolled around Harry's feet. The demon's mouth were letting out a single sound now, a long, sustained funeral lament. Harry took it as a sign that the creature was readying himself for death, and the thought put power into his third swing. It went, more by accident than intention, exactly where the second blow had gone, and took off the top half of the enemy's head. The demon lurched, and the severed crown slid off and landed on Kaz's chest, several eyes popping from the pressure as it struck. The rest of the pitiful thing sagged for a moment or two in Kaz's arms, and keeled over, dead. It took the combined strength of Lana, Harry, and Dale, pushing from above, and Kaz pushing from below, to roll the corpse away. But when they finally did, Kaz pushed himself into a sitting position, where he paused to wipe some of the blood that had spewed on him, and then got to his feet. "Thank you," he said to Harry. "I thought that was it, man." "Nobody's dying on this trip," Harry said, "especially at the hand of some underling. Understood? Lana? Dale? You follow? We're getting through this." Lana was staring down at the corpse of the demon Harry had brought down. "Do they all look like this?" she asked. "Too many eyes? All those mouths?" "No," said Harry. "That's what I was saying before. The bastard sprung back to life. I think that's what the fog did. This isn't normal. Not by a long shot." "I think we left normal back in New York," Lana said. "Honey, we left normal a long time before that," Dale said. Demore nodded in terse agreement. We probably got a nice little window to move freely through the city, so I just suggest we go while the going is still good." Everyone agreed, and they proceeded up the shallow incline that led from Janker's Gate, continuing through the city at a steady pace. They were being watched, Harry knew, every step of the way. At first he only felt it, that tingling sigil on the back of his neck, the ever-trustworthy UI, but soon there were more obvious signs. Doors that had been opened a slit and were closed sharply when his gaze chanced their way. Crude curtains or drapes were dropped back into place, and now and then he heard voices from inside the houses, cries and arguments, and sometimes what might have been demonic prayers, offered up in the hope of some fiendish salvation. At every intersection they crossed, Harry glimpsed figures skipping out of sight into the doorway or alleys. A few were even spying on them from the rooftops, risking whatever was left of their lives as they stalked the 4 earthly life forms. Suddenly, Harry's tattoos went wild. He said nothing, but, out of reflex, his hand went to the place on his neck where his tattoos sang a warning cry. "Ah, Christ," Kaz said. "I know what that means." What means?" Dale said, his voice barely audible. "Shit," said Harry. "My tattoos. Kaz, I forget you can read me like a book." "I wrote that book," Kaz said. "Yeah, well, I'm being warned to proceed with caution." "Harold, we're in hell. Caution is a fucking given. I put that fucking tattoo on you. And the way your hand shot to that bit of ink tells me that caution doesn't even close." "Fine. You wanted the hard sell? We're not alone. I think we're fucked. Happy now?" Harry said, walking on. "Very," Kaz replied. As if on cue, from somewhere near, the sound of feet on stone was heard. From another direction, a short cry loosened. Seemingly in response, Harry and his friends heard an unholy, deafening din rising from every direction. The loosed sound hadn't been a cry at all. It was a summons, and it was answered in the multitudes. A horde of terrible voices suddenly punctuated the air with madhouse noises, shrieks, and sobbing, and joyless laughter, all varying imitations of the previous sound, so that within the space of less than a minute the city was no longer silent, but filled completely with this cacophony. Its source steadily closing on the intersection where Harry and his friends now stood. "Listen," said the Hell Priest. "What in God's name is that?" Norma said. They had stumbled together up the bastion's 91 steps, which led them to the massive front door of the regime's sanctuary. It was there now that the priest attempted to gain entrance. "I used to live in Los Angeles," Norma said, "off a winding road called Cold Heart Canyon. At night, sometimes you'd hear the yipping of the coyote, then a whole chorus of them joining in as they came to share the kill. That's what it sounds like. A bunch of damned coyotes, howling with happiness because they're about to eat." "That's exactly what it is." "Oh, Christ," Norma said. "Harry." "He should consider himself lucky if he dies here and now," said the priest, raising one hand and laying his palm flat against the door. "The regime's assassins are afraid. I can hear them weeping on the other side of this door." She could too, now that she paid it closer attention. It was more than simple tears that escaped them. There was terror in their cries. "They've never seen the void," the Cenobite said, raising his voice so that they could hear them. "They are like children now, waiting for me to come inside and show them the way." A voice rose above the sobs, its owner doing his best to sure sound of his sanity. "Go back from whence you came, demon." "I have heard your troubles, friend," said the Hell Priest. "The denials at this threshold were laid by Lucifer himself. You shall never gain access." "Then I shall waste no more of your time." So saying, the demon waved his hand over the door and muttered an incantation so soft, Norma wasn't quite sure she'd heard anything at all. Whatever rite the priest had issued, it worked its magic, but quick. Oh no! Oh, damnation!" said the same voice from behind the door. "Wait!" "Yes?" said the Hell Priest asked. "Yes?" the Hell Priest asked. "Don't go!" "As you've said, you are safe within your walls. You have no need of me." "We are under siege. There are things in here. With us. Terrible things. It's too dark to see. Help us, please." "Hallucinations. You don't think that'll work, do you? They're demons. They know," Norma said. "Stop talking to him," a second voice from within. "He's playing tricks on us." And then, "You're stupid for coming here, Cenobite. The regime has plans for you." "See," Norma said, her question answered. "Wait," the Hell Priest said to her. Be quiet," the first voice said. "Let him in. He has powers. He can help us." "Yes, let him in," said another, his assent taken up by half a dozen others. "Turn off the denials, Kafda," said the first guard. "Let the priest in." "It's a trick, you damn fool," the dissenter broke in. "Enough," the first guard said. There was a sound of ragged motion and the thump of a body being thrown against the door. "No, don't!" The dissenter never finished his sentence. In place of his word came the sound of a violent impact, then that of his dying body sliding down the door and hitting the floor. Norma's mouth hung open in shock. "I don't believe it," she said. "And our journey has not yet even begun," the Hell Priest said. "Misata," came the voice of the first guard. "Get this carcass out of here while I turn off the denials. Priest, are you still there?" "I am," said the Cenobite. "Step away from the threshold and be careful." There was a resonant click, and the door swung wide. A large yellow and orange demon greeted him at speed. The soldier was easily twice the priest's height and dressed in golden armor. He ushered the Cenobite into the chamber, gesturing frantically all the while. The Hell Priest, followed by Norma, entered the small antechamber, occupied by a dozen soldiers, all clad in the same war vestments. "They're everywhere. These monsters," the guard pleaded. "You must help." The Cenobite made a tiny nod and said, "I know. I came for the regime. They are in danger. Where is their chamber?" The soldier pointed towards a staircase that branched off in dozens of different directions. "I will lead you. The tower is a vertical labyrinth. You will go mad before you find your way to the second floor. This is the first chamber. Theirs is the sixth. You will find this scourge. We will fight this scourge together, brother. These fiends will not carry the day. The remaining chambers are each one 1,000 soldiers strong. Then I have much work to do, the Hell Priest said, and he reached into his robe and took out of its folds a Le Marchand configuration and handed it to the guard. Here, he said. What is this? The soldier inquired, taking it in his hand. A weapon. I have several. He took out 3 and passed them out to the demons, who passed them on to the soldiers. What do they do? One of them asked. Open them, the Hell Priest said. 17. Harry might have taken some comfort at the belief that all but the soul was a human illusion, but there was nothing in his present circumstance that looked illusory. The street at the intersection where he, Kaz, Dale, and Lana stood was a nightmare with no foreseeable escape. Each of the humans stared down a different street, but all saw the same unwelcome sight, the monstrously transformed citizens of the unholy city coming at them. The terrible multiplicities had sprung up from the places where the fog's seed had lodged themselves, rendering each beast a horror unto itself. All had stripped themselves, completely naked, to add injury to insult. Their already transformed anatomies brought forth strange, blood-sopped blossoms, and from those blossoms further generations of seeds were now sprouting. They had all too clear a vision of the seeds at their fecund work. New victims convulsed as their outgrowths swelled and burst, spitting juices in all direction. The flesh they had wetted instantly casting out nets of ripe red veins that were moments later nurturing the creation of new multiplicities. The second generation's growth was more confident than the first, and more ambitious. The third and fourth, exponential. The forms that they brought into being weren't simply siblings of the anatomy where they'd landed. They were aberrant and fantasized. And again, as with their predecessors, the urgent need to be naked, to expose every niche and fold to seeding, so that in the space of a minute or two the number of appendages had tripled, the newly infested still shrieking as wave upon wave of agony overtook them. Strangest of all, among the new recruits to this unspeakable regiment, were the demonic children. Freed from the constraints of hearth and home, their bodies, for all apparent vulnerability, more eager than even those of their parents to reinvent themselves. They wanted to be a new species, the seeding providing the perfect reason to unleash every heretical thought that they could make flesh. That's a weird phrase, I'll say that again. The seeding providing the perfect reason to unleash every heretical thought the day could make flesh. Even as their parents reached the limit of their disorder, their children were overtaking them, giving their bodies to the grand experiment with an abandon their elders had tried in their flesh too long to control. Hence the boy with 30 arms or more reaching out from the roots in his back, or the adolescent girl whose sex had split her all the way up to the breastbone, her wet wings undulating as if opened to invite the world to do its worst, or the infant even, seated into its mother's arms and riding the saddles of her milk-fed breasts, its hands a blistered ball swelled to 3 times or more its natural size, so that it clips its mother's face completely. As for the limbs, they had quadrupled in number, and become in the process little more than a bone and sinew, their joints defying nature, and turned backwards to embrace their mother's body, like the many-jointed legs of a spider. There was nothing of pity here, nor, needless to say, of love. Simply the unrelenting hurt and horror of tomorrow's hell being born on a bed of glass and nails, where yesterday's hell was in long, messy process of dying. And the occupants of new hell had blocked the streets from one side to the other. There was nothing to be done, and nowhere to go. The circle of the enemy was around them, complete. "What's the plan, Harold?" "Die?" Harry said. "No," said Dale, more in defiance than fright. "Fuck this." And he pressed on towards easily the most crowded of the 4 directions. "Dale, get back here!" Harry shouted. Dale didn't listen. And then there were 3, Lana said. Dale stopped when he reached the first swarm of damned and distorted. "Oh, just go away," he said. So, he raised his cane and jabbed its pointed tip into the belly of a demon boy. The young demon shrieked, beating a hasty backwards retreat on many of his feet. There was a mark, Harry saw, a small black circle that was growing exponentially quickly, becoming a mess of black lightning bolts shooting through the villain's veins. The demon lost his balance and went sprawling down amongst his comrades. A female demon charged towards Dale. He was waiting for her, cane in hand. The silver tip pricked a cluster of sapling breasts, and her dozen eyes bulged from their loose-hanging sockets. She unleashed a howl, and her skin too quickly became a maze of poisoned flesh. Harry watched everything and was beginning to understand. From the flesh from the demon's boy wound had begun to fold back upon itself, like blossoming flower petals, exposing the shiny, wet muscle beneath. His skin was retreating with great precision, the square growing, its symmetry spoiled only by the blood that was spilling over as the patch of exposed flesh grew steadily larger. The same process was happening on the female demon's breasts, where some kind of miracle had left its mark. But the speed at which the square was growing had increased fivefold or more, her multitude of teats all but stripped of skin, her blood-matted chest hanging on the drapes of her breastplate. Dale jabbed at another demon, and another. Each demon was seized in agony, and as the place where they had been pierced opened and unmade itself. "What the fuck is going on?" Lana asked. "Dale, you're a goddamn genius," Harry said. "I could kiss you." "Promises, promises," Dale said, impaling another demon. Harry tightened his grip on the machete and headed towards his own besieged horde. "New plan," Harry said. Grab whatever weapons you have, and start cutting." "Are you sure about this?" Lana asked. Harry looked back at her and smirked. "Dead sure." Probably not the best choice of words, but saying all she had to say, Lana pulled out 2 knives, gripped them, wrists crossed with elbows out, and walked straight at the oncoming swarm. "I guess that means me too," Kaz said. He pulled out his weapon and followed suit. Kaz took a swing, slicing the 7th forearm of an enormous granddaddy of a demon. The beast clutched at the wound with 4 of his hands, but the gauze was not enough to staunch the wound. From underneath the cluster of fingers, the demon's flesh unfolded itself, devouring muscle and bone from top to multi-layered bottom. Harry and his group of harrowers hacked and slashed their way through the bulbous throng, needing only 1 wound to stop each adversary. There were none among the demons who were granted immunity. They all went down, young and old alike, falling, their bodies racked with spasms, reaching with desperation to catch hold of the killing mote, but never far enough to seize the enemy at its work. In a short time, there were dying demons lying everywhere, a dozen deep in some places, sprawled over one another, a mass of bodies in the process of self-skinning, pools of blood rising between them all. Harry glanced back at Dale, Lana, and Kaz. "That wasn't too bad," he said. Kaz, panting, stared at his comrades expectantly. "Does anyone want to explain to this big, dumb queen what the hell just happened?" "You forgot to mention gorges," Dale said. Kaz looked down at Dale and smiled coyly as he brushed a severed nipple off his shoulder. "I don't give a shit how it worked," Lana said. "All I need to know is that we're still breathing." "Clearly," Harry said, "something was causing those poor bastards to sprout multiple pieces of anatomy." "Clearly," said Lana. "Whatever was making that happen, it didn't seem to care whether it multiplied appendages or wounds. Its mission was simply to divide and conquer. The second we opened a hole in one of those things, the working did the rest for us." "Got it," said Lana. "Good enough for me." "Dale, did you know that would happen?" Kaz asked, stepping over a small mountain of bleeding cunts. "I hadn't the foggiest," Dale replied. "I just knew we had to find Norma, and God wouldn't allow us to be stopped." "Do me a favor, Dale," Harry said. "Yes, dear?" "I know this one went well, but next time you put my life on the line because of what you think God will allow, leave me out of it." "Spoil sport," Dale said. "Let's move," Harry said, by way of reply. I can't wade through all of this," Lana said. It's just a little blood, Harry remarked, catching hold of Lana's arm. Come on. Muttering something under her breath, Lana went with him while Kaz and Dale brought up the rear. Together they stumbled over the mass of bodies, only to find that many of them still had some measure of life in them, the skinning process as yet incomplete. That was something, Kaz said, watching the continual undoing beneath his soul. I've seen stranger things, Harry said. You say that about everything, Lana said. Not everything. Oh yeah? Like what? Harry pointed past her, towards the end of the city. The last shreds of the fog had cleared away, and for the first time they could see all the way down the street to the impossibly tall black marble... to the impossibly tall black marble building that stood on his end. Yeah, that's hard to top, she said. Without anyone uttering another word, they began walking. The wind had escalated considerably, raising clouds of dirt and litter, and, when it gusted with particular vehemence, opening and closing doors along the street. A crudely constructed chimney was toppled from a roof half a block closer to the regime's headquarters, the sliding bricks bringing down the slates and eaves with them. The wind brought clouds, too, grey shreds like dirty cloths, torn between the roofs and the ever-grinding stone. Some of the clouds even pressed down onto the street and raced along with the wind at the level of the eaves. The harrowers put their heads down against the bluster and moved on towards the unguarded gates of the monolithic structure without further challenge. How thoughtful, Harry said. They left the front door open for us. Very considerate, Lana said. Here's the plan, Harry continued, never breaking stride. Me and Dale will deal with any demons we find. Kaz and Lana, if Norma's in there, you grab her and you get her out of there at all costs. Leave us behind if you have to. Any objections? Of course, the objections were innumerable, but not one was uttered aloud. Without protestation, they entered the tower. We're about an hour and a half in. We're going to take a short break. Give me a moment to recuperate, and I'll see you soon after that. Let's see. Now, you'll have to bear with me. I'm fairly new to this. How do I... Welcome back. I will say, reading directly from a book is not as easy as I hoped it would be. Gotta sit there with the book open. I'll probably be reading from a Kindle. I know it doesn't really matter to you guys. I'm just reading whatever, but this particular book has been a little difficult. Also, it's amazing how much it kills my back. But no more of my pain. Let's get back into Harry D'Amour's pain. 18. What the fuck is this? Lana asked. Sorry. That caught me off guard as well. What the fuck is this? Lana asked. They had entered the tower not knowing what to expect, but anticipating at least the semblance of a fight. What they got, however, was the first-hand look at the aftermath of a massacre, and a recent one at that, judging by the steam that rose from the still fluttering corpses. The bodies that blocked the passageway just in front of the door were already feeding and breeding breeding place of hell. What? The bodies that blocked the passage just inside the front door were already the feeding and breeding place of hell's green-gold doxy flies, the smallest of which were 10 times the size of their humble Earth equivalent, and their offspring were correspondingly eager. Some of these bodies were already pulsing masses of larval life, devouring what they'd been born into with monstrous appetite. As Harry listened to the play of his friend's footfalls, he surveyed the blood-drenched canvas before his eyes. He knew this was the work of the Cenobite. These, Harry guessed, were the only beings of the visions to which the Hell Priest had requested he bear witness. He was happy to decline the offer. Not that he'd entertain the notion, but the demon they were chasing was powerful. That much was certain. The problem, however, was that he wanted What? The problem, however, was that he was far more powerful than Harry ever wanted to admit. Harry was standing ankle-deep in the organs of many large demonic soldiers, warrior demons, clearly, who likely spent the majority of their lives preparing for battle, and they had been felled in the blink of an eye. Harry shuddered. "Jackpot," Kaz said, bringing Harry back from his thought. Broken from his trance, Harry looked up and saw his friends collecting weapons from the dead soldiers. Kaz had used his time wisely, and had already acquired a considerable collection of belts bristling with knives, all ornately decorated, but clearly more than showpieces. "Hallelujah," Dale sang. "We're trading up." "Good thinking," Lana said. She drew out a knife that sprouted a second, third, and fourth blade, intersecting the first one so as to create an 8-pointed star. "I'll take this one." "Great," Harry said, giving the chamber a twice-over. "Let's take what we need and get the fuck out of here." After making their selections from the vast array of infernal weaponry, they advanced towards the first set of stairs, though each pair of eyes started on the same step. None landed upon the same location. My thoughts exactly," said Lana. "You'd think he'd go easy on us for once," Dale said. "Oh, he has," Harry offered. Everyone followed Harry's gaze and saw the small stream of blood trickling down the face of one of the stone steps. "Hell's breadcrumbs," Harry said. "You know," said Lana, "most people wouldn't follow the blood trail. Not us, though. Jesus Christ." "Look on the bright side," Kaz said. "If there are bears in hell, they won't come after you first." That barely makes sense." "Barely?" Kaz said, grinning. "Shut up," said Lana. Harry had already begun to climb the stairs, far too intent on his mission to allay his fears with humor. His sobriety quickly caught on, and Lana and Kaz silenced themselves, following Harry up through the vertical labyrinth. They pressed through the chamber after chamber without error, always following the beginning of the blood trail at one end of the other. For there were many bodies in the various chambers of the bastion through which they'd passed. Some looked as though they'd turned on one another. Others had simply been casually murdered by someone passing by. There were a few who were still faintly alive, but they were all far too gone to answer any question that might have been put to them. Harry and his followers pressed until they reached the sixth and final chamber at the top of the Black Tower. Like every door they'd reached up until that point, this too was wide open, though the chamber Harry and company walked into was vastly different from anything they had seen until now. The area was chaotic. There was no doubt about that, but there was no blood to wade through as there had been in the previous chambers, and there had clearly been a struggle here, but there were no corpses. Pinhead had failed in destroying the regime, and by the looks of the place, he hadn't been very happy about it. "Once more into the proverbial breach, then," Dale said. "When in Rome," Harry said as he entered the chamber. Harry stared across the wreckage of the room, his eyes fixed on a large archway, seemingly the only other means of entry or exit found in the room. At the opposite end of the chamber, inside the archway, inside this archway, he saw, was a void. No bricks or mortar, but for that matter, no light, object, colors of any kind. All sense of place was lost there. In the world above, a sight such as this would have invited madness. In this realm, however, it was yet another one of hell's tiresome mind games. Harry found it surprising how soon his senses numbed to the madness of the place. "Do as the demonic do," Dale said, finishing Harry's thought for him. "That's how the expression goes, right?" Dale walked through the debris, spinning his cane as he moved. "What the fuck, man?" Kaz said. "What does this thing want? Like, what's the end game, you know?" "No," Harry said, drawing closer to the archway of nothingness. "I don't know." His eyes were fixed on sight, or lack thereof, as he approached and realized the archway wasn't as barren as it had appeared to be. The nothingness was an illusion, and the closer Harry drew, the more the nullity before him was beginning to form a flat, monochromatic image. Perhaps the magic of this thing depended upon the nearness of a warm body, or perhaps it had simply begged scrutiny in order for it to work. Whatever the case, Harry was now within a stride or two of its location, and he could plainly see a flickering image of one of the streets he and his harrowers had passed through on their way to the tower. He recognized the location because it wasn't easy to miss the remains of the recently slain and infected damned who were still lying there. "Can someone tell me what I'm looking at?" Harry said. "Is this magic or technology?" "What? Where?" Dale said, turning to look in Harry's direction. "What you got there, Harold?" Kaz said. Harry opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words escaped his lips. Dale, Lana, and Kaz joined Harry at the threshold of the archway. Silently, they all stood, staring at the image before them. Finally, Lana spoke. "Looks like a kind of television. Like a really shitty closed-circuit image." Harry squinted. He hadn't seen much television in his lifetime, but from what he remembered, it was a very different experience. "Can I borrow your cane?" Kaz said to Dale. "You can hold my cane as long as you like," Dale said, handing Kaz his cane with a playful glance. Kaz took the cane, trying to conceal his smile, and quickly turned toward the flickering image, lifting the cane. He extended his arm, careful not to get too close, and made to press the ivory tip into the surface of the screen. "Be careful," Harry said. "Harold, I'm fine," Kaz replied, and then he pressed the tip into the archway. The image rippled where the tips touched the surface, like concentric waves disturbing a serene, translucent lake. "Ah," Harry said. "It's not either or, it's both. Technology and magic." "Looks that way," Lana said. "I've never seen anything like it, but it's got to be some kind of liquid display screen, held upright by some kind of working." Kaz continued the experiment and moved the cane across the liquid, causing the image before them to turn like the pages of a book. The view of the streets folded away and gave way to a new, entirely unfamiliar vista of the world in which they were outsiders. "How the fuck? Don't burst the brain cell, Harold," Kaz said. "It's like a security camera." "Shit!" Kaz lost the grip of the cane, and it fell into the archway. "My lucky cane!" Dale shouted. Though no one was to know, he had a collection of over 200 lucky canes, all identical, all with the same opulent design, all, according to Dale, equally necessary. Quickly, Kaz dropped to his haunches and reached his hand out toward the rippling void. "I wouldn't do that," Carrie said. "A cane's one thing, but—" "Relax, my ink ain't saying shit, and I'm assuming yours isn't either." Harry said nothing. Kaz nodded. "That's what I thought." And so saying, he thrust his hand to the liquid and grabbed for the cane. "Please be careful," Dale said. Kaz turned to Dale with a smile, wordlessly retrieving the cane from the void and bringing it back to the chamber. "I got a notion," Kaz said. "Kaz, let me try something." You mind? You mind? Kaz asked Dale. "He can touch my cane too," Dale said. "I'm honored," Harry said, as Kaz handed him the cane. Harry inserted the cane into the liquid and flicked it quickly, revealing image upon image. Faster and faster Harry flicked it, and in different directions, up, down, left, right, revealing different locations and images, each based on each of the different movements. "I'll be," said Dale. "It's like the walls have eyes." "Yeah, and each direction," Harry said, moving the cane at a slower, more deliberate pace, "represents an axis. Looks like we can go left, right, forward and back." "In and out," Dale said. Kaz chuckled. "Good question," Harry said, and he pressed the cane deeper into the image on the screen. A vast mountain range of craggy, jagged rocks, and the picture zoomed in for a closer look. "That would be a yes," Harry said, continuing to play with the mechanism. "I don't say this often, but I'm impressed." "Yup," Kaz said. "These fuckers definitely got the gizmos and— Wait, what was that? Go back! Fuck!" "What did you see?" Lana said. "The other way," Kaz instructed. "There, stop!" Harry brought the image round again and saw on the screen the Hell Priest, accompanied by several regime soldiers, each one of them at least 7 feet tall. Resting comfortably on the shoulders of the tallest soldier was Norma. "Fuck me dead," Harry said. Harry and his harrowers stood there, looking into the void at the image of Norma, surrounded by a small army of fiends. "There you are, Mama," said Kaz. "We're coming for you." "You bet your fucking ass we are," said Harry. "What is that?" Dale asked. "Oh God," said Lana. "Look at the other soldier. In his hand, is that a severed head," said Harry. "I've seen enough of 'em to know." Harry pushed the cane deeper into the liquid image. The picture of the figures on screen grew larger. "I still don't know what we're seeing or how we're seeing it, but it's great to see Norma again," Harry said. Harry gently eased the cane in farther, ensuring he did not lose sight of the Hell Priest and his brigade. Suddenly, the priest and his entourage stopped dead in their tracks. The demon who carried the severed head lifted it up, and the priest slowly and cautiously turned back and began walking towards them. "What the fuck are they doing?" Kaz said. "No fucking clue," Lana said. "This thing doesn't have audio, does it?" "If it does, I haven't figured out where the mute button is yet." Harry and his harrowers watched as the Hell Priest reached for the severed head and lifted it towards his face, putting the mouth to his ears. "You gotta be fucking kidding," said Kaz. "Afraid not, old friend," Harry said, turning to Kaz. "That fucking head is still talking." "Yeah," said Lana, "and I have a pretty good idea what it said." And all too soon, so did the rest of the harrowers. On Lana's prompting, they had returned their gazes to the screen, and saw that the Hell Priest had now lowered the head, and was looking out at Harry and his companions as though seeing perfectly clearly the lens through which he was being watched. "That's fucking spooky," said Kaz. "Right," Harry said, his voice tremulous. "There goes the element of surprise." 19. Norma had done her best to create a rough map in her mind, tracing the journey she'd taken in the company of the Cenobite, the few soldiers he had conscripted from among the survivors of the massacre at the Bastion, and the still living severed head of a military general named Pentathia, one of Hell's highest-ranking officials, whom the Cenobite had beheaded without hesitation or effort. and though the chance of ever making the return journey seemed remoter by the mile, she still held on to the tender hope that she might find a way back. They had left the bastion with one of the soldiers, carrying Norma on his back. Still, she still had enough powers of persuasion to get her mount, whose name was Konochi, to quietly describe to her the territory they journeyed over once they were beyond the bastion. It seemed a promising arrangement from the start, with Konochi using a soldier's unadorned vocabulary to describe the landscape through which they traveled. But his simple eloquence quickly faltered once they got beyond the last of Pyratha's streets and ventured out into the wasteland itself. There was nothing for him to describe except emptiness. "Are we on a road of some kind?" Norma asked. Konochi lowered his voice to keep his reply from reaching the Hell Priest's ears. "The only road we're following is the one in the Lord Tempter's head, and if he loses his way, we're all dead." "That's not very comforting," said Norma. This silenced the conversation for a while. When Konochi took up talking again, it was because finally there was a change in view. Now, however, what he's seeing wasn't so easy to describe, and he fumbled for words. "There are huge pieces of wreckage," he said, strewn across the desert, the remains of machines the likes of which he had never seen before. To his soldier's eye, it looked as though a war had been fought here, though he freely admitting he could see no killing purpose to which these vast toppled devices could have been put. And if there were demons who might have died during this war, he had no way of knowing, since there was not so much as a single bone underfoot. "Do demons have ghosts?" Norma asked. "Of course," Konochi replied. "There will always be those that won't let go of who they were." "And if this had been a battlefield, there'd be ghosts wandering around?" "Perhaps there are." "I'd know if there were," Norma replied. "Ghosts and I have a way of crossing paths, and I don't sense them here. Not one. So if this was a battlefield, it was one where all the dead went to a contented rest, and that would be a first for me." "Then I have no more ideas," the soldier said. Despite Norma's encouragement, the descriptions grew steadily sparser. But as she was riding on his shoulders, her arms wrapped around his neck, it wasn't hard for Norma to read the signals that were rising off the soldier's body. His skin was getting clammier, his pulse quickening, his breath too. He was afraid. Norma knew better than to impugn his masculinity by attempting to reassure him. She just held tight and kept her peace. The wind rose for a time, its gusts so strong they would have thrown her over if she had been on her own. And then, just as the rising velocity of the wind started to cause Konochi to stagger, the storm died away completely. There was no slow diminishing of the force. One moment they were being struck by gust upon gust. The next, the wind seemed to have died away completely. "What happened?" Norma whispered to Konochi. The sound of her own voice gave her some answer to the mystery. The wind hadn't suddenly stopped blowing. They had simply stepped out of it into what sounded, to judge by the noise of their feet on the pebbles and her words, like some kind of passageway, the walls of which corrupted the sounds, stretching them or slicing them into slivers. "The wasteland's gone," he said. "The stories are true. It's all folding up around us, and we're going to get folded up in it." He started to turn around, his breath coming in panicky gasps. "Don't you dare," Norma said, catching hold of one of his ears, twisting it as hard as she could. It was the kind of thing an irritated parent might do to a troublesome child, and perhaps, for that reason, it gained the soldier's attention. He stopped mid-turn. "That hurts." "Good. It's supposed to. Now listen to me. I don't know you from a warm hole in a cold corpse, but there's been enough bloodshed already without you adding your body to the heap. Wherever he's taking us, he knows what he's doing." "If it were possible, I would be humbled," the Hell Priest remarked from quite a distance ahead. It was obvious he'd heard every word Norma and the soldier had scared. "You're right, of course. I haven't come this far to deliver us... You're right, of course. I haven't come this far to deliver us into oblivion. I have such sights to show you. Soon you will have answers to questions you have never even dared ask." The words cut through Konochi's panic. His heartbeat ebbed, his skin dried, and he picked up his stride once more. And it was just as the Hell Priest had promised. After 30 or 40 yards, the passageway and its confines opened up. What do you see? Norma asked. There was a long pause. Finally, Kanachi said, It's so big. I'm not sure. Set her down, the Hell Priest said. Kanachi did as instructed. The pebbles were extremely uncomfortable beneath Norma's bony behind. But within a few minutes of sitting down, there was the sound of running feet, off to her right, and shouts of what surely was adoration from those who were approaching. Kanachi had walked off, leaving Norma to interpret what had happened next by sound alone, which she was used to doing. She guessed that perhaps a dozen or so creatures had come along the beach to pay their respects to the Hell Priest. She heard several dropping down onto the pebbles, whether kneeling or lying she couldn't tell, to demonstrate their reverence. Their shouts subdued now to sibilant whispers. Only one voice rose above the worshipful mutterings, that of an aged female, who addressed the Hell Priest in a language Norma had no knowledge of.
Avositar, Lazal Matazu.
Ithur Pisatir, the Hell Priest replied.
Sumatum Solt, Avositar,
the woman said, and then, apparently addressing the others, Patu, Patu! Pick up your baggage, soldier, the Hell Priest said. The Azil are prepared for our arrival. They've readied our vessels. As soon as Kanachi hoisted Norma onto his back, he said, I'll be glad to leave this place. Then, more quietly, I'm gladder to leave these freaks. Norma waited until the trek along the beach was underway, and she heard the sound of feet on the pebbles to cover her questions before she dared ask her questions. What do you mean by freaks? They're inbred, Kanachi said. Can't you smell them? They're disgusting. When this is over, I'm gonna bring a squad out here and clean this filth up. But they're demons, like you, aren't they? Not like me. Them is shapen. Heads too big, bodies too small, all of them naked. It's an insult to their heritage. Makes me sick. They must be stomped out. What heritage? The Azil were the first generation of angels after the falls, the sons and daughters of those who had been cast down with our Lord Lucifer. Theirs were hands that built Pyratha, and then, when it was finished, and our Lord Lucifer pronounced it good, they went with him to their own land, which he had made for them as a reward for their labors. And having gone into secret country, they were never seen again. Now I know why. And where is Lucifer? Does he have his own secret country? He's been gone many, many generations. As where he is right now, it isn't my place to ask, nor is it my right to know. The Lord of Lords is with us every moment and in every place. Even now? In every moment, in every place, the soldier replied. Now, unless you want to walk from here, let's let this subject sleep. Norma and the soldier continued in silence, walking along the beach as the Azil led the Hell Priest and his entourage to their boats. The Azil had started chanting now. The chant's rhythmic power, building phrase upon phrase, changed with obsessive devotion. The chant turned Norma's thoughts to pulp. She couldn't hold two notions together. They need to go out on the boat, Norma, Kanachi said. Can I go with her? He asked somebody, and was given the answer he wanted. I'll sit in front of you. Kanachi lifted Norma off his shoulders and gently deposited her on the wooden seat. She reached out to the left and right of her, running her fingers over the carved beams. The boat did not feel particularly stable. Even though they were in the shallows, it rolled alarmingly whenever someone climbed aboard. Where is he? She asked Kanachi. In the first boat, he replied. They carved him a kind of throne. How many boats are there? Norma asked. 3, answered Kanachi, all carved with angel wings running the length of each side on each boat. Every barb and vein of every feather perfectly carved. I never saw anything so beautiful in my life. Truly we are blessed to bear witness to such events. Funny, said Norma. I've never been happier to be blind. The old demon woman who first addressed them spoke again. When I go, I start bid chanting to conceal any noise you make from Guoto, The name brought barely audible rumblings from the Azil, who were in the boats. Desperate little prayers, Norma guessed, to keep the Kuoto away, whatever it was.
All of you, the demon went on, not say a word until you get into...
God, I don't know why I'm instinctively doing it in that voice.
All of you, the demon went on, not say a word until you get into last place. Kuoto hears well.
The observation was echoed in whispers by the entire assembly. Kuoto hears well. Kuoto hears well. Kuoto hears well. The old demon woman said,
Be wise. Be silent. Be safe. We are staying here and making little noise that will drive Kuoto deeper.
The boats were pushed off from shore, their hulls scraping on the stone for a few seconds before they floated free. Then those who had the oars, one of whom was Konochi, began to paddle, and if the strength of the wind against Norma's face was anything to judge by, they were skimming through the water at a tremendous pace. Norma could hear the bow of the boat behind them, cutting the water, and very occasionally the sound of one of the oars striking the waves from the boat in front, but otherwise, the first portion of the journey, which took perhaps half an hour, went without incident. Soon after, however, Norma felt a sudden drop in temperature, and her skin began to crawl with goose flesh. She could feel it pressing against her face and chilling her lungs when she drew her next breath. Despite this, the boats continued on their expeditious paths through the water, sometimes coming out of a patch of mist for a few teasing moments of warmth, only to plunge back into the bitter air before Norma could even stop her teeth from chattering. The noise she was making was loud enough for one of the fellow passengers to pass forward a piece of canvas that the Konochi placed between her teeth to silence her. Finally, the mist began to thin a little, and then, as the boats came to shore, suddenly it was gone. That's when Konochi spoke. "Oh, demon nation," Konochi said. "It's beautiful." "What is?" Norma said, leaning closer to Konochi, but he gave no reply. "Tell me," Norma said. "What? What do you see?" In the span of his life, which had been to date far longer than any human life, the Hell Priest had witnessed a great deal that would have cracked lesser minds wide open like fumbled eggs. He had once visited a continent in a remote dimension that had contained a single species of mottled-shelled creatures the size of roadkill mongrels, their only food one another, or, if pressed to it, their excremental remains. Truly, the Hell Priest was no stranger to the abhorrent, and yet, now that he was in the place where he had longed to be for so many years, the place that had conjured in his mind's eye waking dream upon waking dream, why, he wondered, did he find himself nostalgic for the presence of those corrupted beasts who had only earned his contempt in earlier times? As soon as he begged the question, he knew the answer, though there wasn't a living soul in hell, or out of it for that matter, to whom he would have confessed the truth, which was simply this. Now that he was finally here, in the unholy of unholies, where he had ached for too long to be, he was afraid. He had good reason. His boat had come ashore, and fixing his eyes only on the structure, he went to it, like a moth to flame, and now he stood, buried in the oppressive shadow of an edifice so secret, so vast, so complex, that there was nothing, in hell or on earth, even in those most guarded chambers of the Vatican, which had been built by men of such genius, the chambers defied the laws of physics that were vastly larger on the inside than on the out, that any hope of comparison with the place where the Hell Priest now stood. What? Too much deviation. The island upon which the structure had been built was called Yapor Yaziak. Yapora Yariziak. Literally, the last of all possibilities, and the name was no lie. The Hell Priest was finally here, at the end of his journey, with so many betrayals and bloodlettings marking his path, and he actually found himself assailed with doubt. Suppose all his hopes of revelation were confounded. Suppose the Archfiend's majesty had not left any mark on the place for the Cenobite to draw power and understanding from. The sole reason the Hell Priest had come here was to stand in the last testament of Lucifer's genius, He had expected to feel Lucifer's presence in him, filling up the void in him, in doing so, showing him the secret shape of his soul. But as it stood, he felt nothing. He'd read somewhere that the makers of Chartres Cathedral, the masons and the carvers of the great facade, had not chiseled their names unto the finished works as an act of humility for the Creator in whose name the cathedral had been raised. Was it possible, he wondered now, that Lucifer had done something similar, actively erasing the echoes of his presence in the name of a higher power? He was suddenly agonizingly aware of the nails that had been hammered into his skull, their points pressing into the clotted jelly of his brain. He had always understood that this portion of his anatomy, being nerveless, could not give him pain. But he felt pain now. Bleak, meaningless, stupefying pain. "This is not right," he said. There was an echo off the walls of the edifice. They had consumed his words, just as they had his hope. He felt something stirring in his belly, then rising through his tormented body, growing in force as it ascended. He had cultivated a distance from his own despair over the years, but it met him at this place and would never again be put out of sight. He only repeated himself, "This is not right." Harry and his friends had left behind them the kind of sights that 1,000 lifetimes could not have prepared them for. Pyratha's violent insanities, the plague flog of the wastelands, the secret horrors of the bastion, and had been led into a mystery within a mystery. There was no sound of weeping here, or shrieks, or pleas for mercy for that matter. Only the sound of small waves breaking on stones, though there was not a body of water to be seen. Upon leaving the tower and fleeing the city built upon the hills, they had entered a wasteland, littered with what looked like abandoned machinery to the left and right of them. Vast wheels and mammoth coils of chain, toppled structures that had certainly been many stories high, their purpose impossible to fathom. With increasing frequency, lightning struck downwards and danced an incandescent tarantella over the metal structures, throwing off a shower of sparks in places that in turn started fires among some of the wooden portions of the devices. Many of these conflagrations raised, the smoke they sent up ever thickening the air. As they pressed on, it grew increasingly difficult to see the sky through the brilliance of the lightning, and its shuddering blazes never broke through, but only intensified the turmoil. Finally, the sky, having been unleashing its lightning in silence for 3 or 4 minutes, spoke out its thunder, peal upon peal, each roll rising to drown out the one before. The reverberations made the ground shake, and that motion in turn caused several of the pieces of machinery to topple, their massive remains breaking into bits, the smallest of which was still the size of a house. The group had picked up their speed as the scale of the event continued to escalate around them, though they were twice obliged to make a detour to avoid pieces of wreckage that came down upon their path, throwing off massive pieces of timber and sheared metal as they did so. The harrowers quickly reoriented themselves on the other side and picked up the pace again within a few strides. Harry, forcing himself to maintain the front position, was finding it harder and harder to keep his bearings. His lungs blazed in his chest. His head thumped to the crazed speed of his heart. His feet were a fool's feet, threatening to throw him down in the dirt with every other step. Lana was several strides behind him, the gap between them steadily closing, but Harry focused his attention as best he could on the road ahead when he thought he'd saw another archway, much like the one he'd left behind at the top of the bastion. Harry was certain that his mind was playing tricks on itself, and in his moment of doubt, his body capitulated. He suddenly knew that he wasn't going to make it. His legs were so weak that they couldn't carry him any farther. He wasn't even sure he wanted them to try. He was only going to slow the rest of them down and put them in harm's way, but he couldn't just stop. He needed to turn to his friends to tell them to go on without him. He'd catch up later, when he'd recovered his strength and put out the blaze in his lungs. At the threshold of the hallucinated archway, Harry bullied his body into turning around with the intent of addressing his friends. As he spun, his body propelled itself forward, and then the lights went out. The roar and the blaze and the motion of the ground beneath his stumbling feet were a single unendurable assault, and drained of strength, he had stumbled and relinquished himself to gravity. He fell into the grey dirt, and his consciousness seemed to flicker out, taking with it the noise of fire and thunder. "Watch," ordered a voice in the darkness. Harry didn't want to watch. He'd seen enough. But he knew that voice. It didn't belong to a face, but rather a feeling and a smell. The air was thick with sulphur, and shame washed over him and dragged him down to a place he thought he might never leave. Then he heard a different voice, one containing a different set of associations, and Harry stirred. "Harold?" It was Kaz. Harry heard him quite clearly. He opened his eyes. Kaz was crouching beside him. "You picked a fine time to fall on your ass, man," Kaz said. He spoke quietly, almost a whisper. Harry pushed himself up out of the dirt and turned his eye to the firmaments. "How long was I out? Where'd the lightning go?" "A minute, maybe less. 1 second we could barely see one another, and then there was another archway, like in the middle of fucking nowhere. Look." Kaz pointed back towards the top of an incline where there was a fracture in the air. "That's where we came through. There were flickers of lightning at the far end of the passageway between the two landscapes, and we stepped into this." Harry hauled his aching body into a sitting position and surveyed the surrounding landscape. The vast machines had gone, as had the grey dust in which they had lain, replaced by the gentle incline of pebbles, reedy trees, and small brush, all of which bounded a body of pristine water. Lana was sitting a few yards from Dale, staring out toward the impossibly clear body of water. Dale had ventured closer to shore, no doubt debating the water's drinkability. "I don't get it," Harry said. "Where's Pinfuck? We weren't very far behind him, and now he's—"
"Bafer, ca, gississimo," shrieked a gravel-laden female voice, interrupting Harry's question.
"The fuck?" said Kaz. I think we'll find out whether we want to or not," said Harry. The Harrowers barely had time to unsheath their weapons when a creature came into view from around the beach. She looked like a misshapen demon. She was squat, no more than 3.5 feet tall, and her bald head virtually fetal in shape and relative proportion to her body. She stood naked, but caked from head to foot with grime. She stood as soon as she saw the Harrowers, and despite their defensive stances, a wide smile spread across her face.
"Bafer, ca, gississimo?"
she said again. Nobody said a word, so she repeated the last word once more, enunciating it as though Harry and company were slow to learn.
"Gississimo?"
"Anybody catch that?" Harry said, getting on to his hands and feet. Harry asked, getting to his feet, his hand close to the place where his knife was hidden.
"Definitely not," said Lana.
"Negative," said Cal. There was a fresh patter of pebbles from behind the demon, and a warm brightness spilled down the beach. Several balls of what looked like braided fire moved into view, hovering 2 or 3 feet above the beach, and then they came abreast of the demon woman, rising up together in one sweeping motion and hanging in a loose circle above the beach. An entourage appeared, a company of perhaps 30 male and female demons, all of whom were as strangely proportioned as the demon woman. Each of them was naked, except for the same caked-on grime they had slathered on their bodies, and dreadlocked hair so that the locks were now semi-solid. Harry loosened the grip on his weapon and sighed. "If this is a trap, I'm too tired to give a shit," he said. The tribe advanced. As they did, another female demon emerged from within the circle. She was old, her breasts hanging completely flat against her body, her dreadlocks long enough to graze the ground.
"Harry the Moor," said the elderly demon woman. "The witness."
"What?" Harry asked. "Who told you that?"
"The black inside,"
said a male The black inside, said a male demon, standing towards the back of his company, his voice and clear as confident as the others in the tribe. The creature continued speaking.
He come before. He having blind woman. He said you come after, to witnessing.
Well, he's wrong, Harry said.
201 and 30 demons you have put down, remarked yet another member of the tribe, a younger creature for whom no apparent reason boasted a noteworthy erection, which he casually toyed with as he spoke. Slaughterer of demonation, Harry Demore.
I don't keep track of those things, Harry said. But if you're right, and you keep playing with your dick like that, very soon it'll be 232. The remark received a current of disapproving murmurs from the assembly.
This cannot happen, one of them said. We are too close to the one who sleeps. Is holy ground.
The one who sleeps, Dale said under his breath. I've met drag queens with scarier names. Who is the one who sleeps? Harry asked, tossing Dale a reproving glance. He is, she is, it is everything. The phrase earned a round of appreciated whoops from the crowd, and here and there shouted out, he is, she is, it is everything. I didn't know hell was polytheistic, Harry said.
You find true soon, Harry Demore, the old demon woman said. We, the Aziel, make sailing for you.
She pointed her gnarled finger toward a spot farther down the shore. There a crew of yet more strangely proportioned demons were pulling ashore 3 beautifully crafted boats. Boats? Harry said. Are those for us?
Aziel help witness to witness. Blacken side commands.
This fucking day gets weirder and weirder. 21. The Aziel brought the harrowers down from the top of the breach towards the boat. Each boat, Harry saw, was big enough to carry at least 10 people. Harry and his friends huddled close as the old demon woman spoke. Harry found himself increasingly perturbed by Earth's idioms concerning the Netherrealm. Why would anyone ever want water in ice hell? Why would anyone ever want ice water in hell? He wondered to himself. The place was fucking freezing.
One boat is for rescuers, the demon woman said. In case boat does overturning in the lake's fury, yes?
It doesn't look very furious, Lana said.
Quoto, was the demon woman's one-word response.
Gesundheit, said Dale. Fine. Then what are the other boats for? Harry asked, nodding towards the second boat, which was already being loaded up with no fewer than 9 passages. All demons. 4 of them were young, barely adolescents. They knelt in 2 rows at the front of the boat, their heads down. Behind them was a much older Aziel, a male who looked to be older than the demon woman. He too knelt, his head inclined. 4 strong young demons took up the oars.
Ah, said the demon woman, the end of her tail flickering back and forth like a cat's. We are having not hopeless, but if bleeding is to be, then they will do bleeding.
Is she talking about a sacrifice? Lana said. Because I am not okay with that.
Harry Demore, witness, Aziel help, please. If Harry Demore is to coming back alive, Aziel will be leading to holes of worms.
Not hopeless, Harry said. Holes of worms? Bleeding? What the fuck are you talking about?
Black insides, wait.
Murmurs of reverence spread through the demons' gathering. Yes, the black inside. That's the only thing you have keep saying that makes any goddamn sense. Did he have Norma with him? The Aziel fell silent. Harry looked at his friends, then back at the demons, and asked again. Norma, human, blind, woman, old. Again, his queries were met with confused silence. Harry, Lana said, touching his arm. Let's keep going. They don't know anything. Harry pressed them one last time. The black inside. Did he say anything else about me, other than the fact that I'm his witness? Was there a message?
Ah, the old demon woman said, excitement in her voice. Message, yes, yes. Black inside says message. Black inside says, Harry Demore to boating, as she spoke. The woman pointed to the boats with one gnarled finger. Or else no eyes goes to forever sleep. That was all Harry needed to hear. Well then, Harry said, heading to the boat. Let's not keep him waiting. Are you sure about this, Harold? Kaz asked. You heard the crone. No eyes. That's Norma. And forever sleep? Harry said as he climbed aboard the boat. I don't think I need to explain that to you. At that, the remaining harrowers climbed aboard the middle vessel with Harry, and in just a matter of few rhythmical strokes of the oars, the three boats were out into the vast darkness of the lake. When Harry glanced back over his shoulder, he saw that the beach was already little more than a sliver of flickering light, diminishing further with every stroke. Harry watched as the old demon woman, who had stayed on shore, was swallowed up by the horizon, leaving him and his friends in the middle of the vast, preternaturally still waters of Lake Hell. There followed a period of curious peacefulness. The only sound that could be heard came from the oars dipping into the waters and lifting again. Dipping, lifting, dipping, lifting, and the soft hiss of the boats cutting through the crystal waters. Harry studied intently the darkness into which they were heading, looking for their place of destination. There were immense thunderheads over the lake, or so his eyes seemed to tell him one moment, and then the next they didn't seem to be clouds at all, but rather a structure that rose up with such ambition that its topmost spire could only be inches from the stony sky. But no sooner had his eyes grasped the solid structure than that too melted away into nothing. Finally he turned to his friends and spoke. So what's at the end of the rainbow? Any guesses? Sanctuary, replied one of the oarsmen. For who? A second oarsman, urgency in his movement, suddenly raised his fingers to his lips and said, Shh! The four oarsmen immediately plucked their oars from the water. The boat glided across the placid body soundlessly, and in the hush, Harry understood the demon's warning. He heard a slow, aching grind of vast wheels, as though some mechanism, not used in many hundreds of years, was lifting its gears from some great sleep and proceeding to move its ancient body. The source of the din was impossible to locate. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. Quoto, Harry murmured. An oarsman nodded silently, pointing a single finger down, indicating it was beneath the boat. Narrowing his eyes, Harry slowly peered over the side of the boat and felt his bowels stir. Harry stared, unblinking, at a pulsating giant, its body writhing deep in the unspoiled waters. He didn't pretend to himself that he had any sense of its scale or shape. The creature looked nothing like any water-dwelling animal he'd ever seen. It resembled, instead, an enormous millipede, its knotted innards visible through a translucent carapace. My bad. I'm just going to take that again. Its knotted innards visible through a translucent carapace. As Harry stared down at the monster, it raised its complicated head and stared back at him. Its head seemed, at first, to be comprised of no more than the same series of scales, such as it had along its entire body, except that they were completely opaque. A scaly, featureless face regarded Harry, or at least he imagined he felt its regard. And then, after a minute or more of fruitless study, the opaque shields retracted and finally revealed the true visage of the Leviathan. Its visage was perhaps 30 feet from brow to chin, but there was humanity there, even in so vast a form. Its eyes were deep set, and there was a ring of milky whiteness around the black horizontal slit that was focusing on him now. Its nose was not unlike that of a bat, flattened and gaping, but its mouth was completely human. Even now, it seemed to be making something very like a smile, uncovering as it did so twin rows of acidic blue teeth. And as it smiled, the dark slits of its pupils opened in a heartbeat, driving every last mote of brightness out. Then, fixed on Harry, it started to rise, peristaltic waves passing through its anatomy to left and right
so that its myriad of legs moved with maximum efficiency, bringing its enormous body, to which at present Harry could see no end, up toward the surface. He watched, silently daring the beast to take him. As it ascended, Harry realized how wrong he'd been about his judgment of the depth of the water. Unused to staring into water so clear, he had assumed the quota was relatively close to the surface. He was wrong. It was deep. Very deep. And the water so unlimited that Harry had no sense of how truly enormous this entity was. The upper two segments were easily the size of a blue whale, and yet, for all its scale, it moved with extraordinary grace, the motion of its legs and the sinuous sweep of its body almost mesmeric. It was Kaz's voice that stirred Harry from his hypnotic state. "Oh, fuck," Kaz said. "I can't look." "Shh," Dale urged. "Jesus Christ," Lana said. "This can't really be happening, can it?" Harry looked up now, to his surprise, that his friends were not speaking of the Quoto. They still had no knowledge of the gargantuan creature beneath their tiny vessel. Their eyes were fixed instead on the first boat, where the old man sitting behind the young Azil had risen to his feet. The youths in front of him were already standing, their heads thrown back, presenting their willing throats. "Yaz nat I Quoto ri," the elder demon said. The blaze sliced through the tender young flesh of the first youth. The adolescent demon was given to the waters. His corpse sank quickly, thanks to the weights tied around his feet. The blood pulsed from the expert cuts the elder demon had made, creating a cloud of swirling crimson. The oarsmen quickly continued the journey at double the speed. Watching the young demon struggle to take in his last tortured breaths made Harry feel sick, and his mind began to wander back to that side street in New York where he was forced to watch Scummy take his last gasping cries for help. That had been murder. What was happening now was sacrifice, though Harry wondered if such a distinction existed for demons. "Everyone just keep their eyes forward," Harry said, turning his gaze back towards the creature in the depths. "We shouldn't question their rituals." The turbulence around the boat was increasingly choppy, and through the blood-stained water, as the boats passed over the creature, Harry saw the vast form open itself up and suck the corpse into its gaping maw. "Holy hell," Lana said. "I told you to look forward," Harry said. "What is it?" Dale said. "The problem is," Lana said, "as soon as I say the words 'don't look down,' you're going to—" "Oh my dear Lord," Dale said. "Exactly," said Lana. "I vote we walk back." "Seconded," said Dale. Kaz was the only one not looking. His eyes were closed, and he was shivering more from more than the cold weather. "I've seen enough," he said, "and I don't have more to see. And I know I have more to see, so I'll sit this one out if you don't mind." Dale reached out and squeezed Kaz's hand. Harry glanced up to see their destination at the opposite end of the lake was close now. As soon as they came within a short distance of the rocky beach, the oarsmen leaped out of the boat and hauled it up to the shore. There was good reason for haste. The waters just beyond the shore were swelling and foaming in their frenzy. The second boat came in, and, catching a frothy wave stirred up by the Quoto's rising, was upended, and all the Azil upon it thrown into the turmoil. Harry rushed the beach, dragging several demons out of the water, and no sooner had all its occupants reached the shore than the third boat came at it with force. It rode the eruption, whose power was sufficient to drive the fragile vessel all the way out of the water and up onto solid ground. With everyone safely ashore, save for a lone sacrifice, Harry stumbled up the beach, moving between everyone to get a clear view of what existed, as he put it, beyond the rainbow. When his eyes landed upon it, he felt his knees go weak. It was a tower so massive Harry's mind failed to wholly grasp the image. This monument before him rose to such impossible heights that he had difficulty discerning between sky and skyscraper. It was Lucifer's masterwork. There was no doubt about it. From the obsessively decorated stepping stones upon which Harry was presently standing to the highest spires whose numbers defied even his confounded wits to count, this was clearly the devil's working, and the sight filled Harry with equal parts dread and awe. Harry knew very little about the architecture, but enough to know that Lucifer's labors here had later inspired a whole architecture of the living world and their own Gothic creations. He'd been inside some of them on his travels in Europe, in the Cathedral of the Holy Cross, and in Santa Eulalia in Barcelona, in Bordeaux Cathedral, and of course Chartres Cathedral, where he'd once taken sanctuary, having just killed in the blizzard-blinded streets a demon who had been seducing infants to their death with corrupt nursery rhymes. But none of those buildings, vast and ambitious and elaborate as they were, held a candle to this mountainous structure. Buttress upon buttress, spire upon spire, the cathedral rose with an arrogance that only a creature systematically confident of his powers would have dared dream, much less make real. Harry thought back to the vast age-ravaged devices that littered the route here. They weren't the remnants of war machines, as he had assumed. They were what was left of the devices that had been built to quarry the stones and carry them where the masons could work the raw rock and prepare it for its place in the immense design. Even with the powers of a fallen angel at Lucifer's disposal, the creation of the cathedral must have been a challenge. To take his fellow fallen angels and other generations of demons who had come from the fallen's seductions and rapes and turn them, by force of will and intellect, into the kind of masons, foundation layers, and spire raisers who would have been required to create this structure must have tested Lucifer's wits and ambition to their limits. But somehow, it had been done. "Has anyone here ever heard of the harrowing?" Dale asked, breaking the silence. No one replied. "It was the time between Christ's crucifixion and his resurrection," he went on. "The story goes, Christ went down into hell, walked among the damned, and set many of them free. Then he returned to earth and broke the bondage of death, supposedly the first and only amnesty hell has ever known." "If it's true, and stranger things have happened," Kaz said, "then that means there's a way out." "Deus ex infernus," Harry said. "There's a big shoes to fill. Let's hope we don't fall too far." And we've reached Book 3, which I think is a great stopping point. I know we're ending a little earlier than usual, but upon reaching Book 3, I think that's a great starting point for the next session, which will be tomorrow. I'd like to thank you again for joining us tonight in the dark corners of the earth and the shadowed mind of Clive Barker. I wish you all pleasant dreams, short days, and long nights. This has been Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio. Good night, and good night.